Then I will call this PSC meeting to order and begin with items of interest from commissioners.
I've got one, Eli.
Thanks.
Am I on? As some of you may or may not know, I am your liaison to the DRAC, Development Review Advisory Committee, and I've sort of been remiss over the months of not more frequently conveying some of the conversations that happen there. So I'm going to start trying to do that. And last week, one of the items that was presented was 4 different developers made a brief presentation about the bird-safe glazing requirements that we approved 3+ years ago as part of Central City 2035. And the gist of their presentation was that they're having an awfully difficult time complying with it. They're having a hard time finding the right kind of glazing. They're having a hard time matching the glazing with the window manufacturers. And they reported it's a time-consuming and expensive process. So just sort of FYI, I don't know if it's an issue if anyone's got any interest in hearing more about, or these folks would be happy to do this short presentation for this commission if that's appropriate in some forum. But I thought it was worthwhile just to kind of hear that. And just one example from one well-known developer, Mill Creek, who gave an example of a standard building they do is what's called a 5/2, 5 stories of housing on top of 2 of, I guess, typically commercial. And he said, typically the window package is about $500,000. And he said on a recent project they spent almost twice that sourcing and getting the bird safe glazing. So that's an added cost in the ballpark of $2,000 a unit. So it's substantial. And that was an item for discussion. I thought I would report back to you because it obviously relates to some work we did 3 years ago.
Thank you. And I have a question on that. Is this something that developers can do appeals on and say we will meet the intent of it some other way? I just don't know.
You know, I don't know. I know there's been, since we adopted it, there's been an administrative rule, but that, you know, a lot of regulation happens through administrative rules and they don't come back to us. So I don't know the answer to your question, Eli. Maybe staff has an answer.
It sure sounds like a business opportunity. Doesn't it?
You do it at home, Katie?
Maybe I'm going to quit and join and start a business on selling bird safe windows. No, I always wonder about that when something is such a big, you know, that it's something that we're requiring, and just wondering why the market doesn't jump in there. It'd be interesting to know what's holding that back.
One speculation I would have, Katie, is that since Portland is, my understanding, is pretty much the only city with this kind of regulation, we're simply not a big enough market to drive, you know, that side of the business.
My understanding is New York City just adopted far more stringent than Portland has, and so and if anybody's going to push the market, I would think New York City might be in a good role to do that.
So maybe in the years to come, it'll be more readily available.
Well, Jeff, thanks for bringing that to us attention, and keep us informed on DRAC. That's helpful to feedback loop.
I will try to be more diligent. I missed, and I won't be in the future. Any
other items of interest from commissioners? Okay, well, let's go to Andrea for a director's report, please. Oh, sorry, we have a hand raised. I am, by the way, going to look at these virtual hands, so I'll do my best over there, because I actually, I saw your hand, Steph, but there's some people I can't see on my screen. We have such great attendance. So Steph, please share an update.
Sorry, I will adhere to protocol in the future. Just want to, that May 30th is the anniversary of the Vanport flood, and owing to COVID-19, Vanport Mosaic Festival could not be in person, but that they are continuing to do so through the 31st virtually. So that's what I got.
Thank you. Any further notes? Okay, Andrea, please.
Great. Good evening, everyone. A couple of quick updates. One, I wanted to, I sent this out to you all, but in case you didn't get a chance to look at it, City Council approved unanimously a resiliency resolution last week to prioritize and center equity and climate in all of the recovery work for COVID-19. So the kind of provides a framework and a foundation from which to build to make sure that we are addressing concerns around equity and climate moving forward, any kind of investments decisions and the like. And then today, City Council had a session, the first session, a work session on CARES Act deliberations. And as you may know, City of Portland received $114 million from the first CARES Act. And from that, apparently there's about 70 million that's been it's not yet been allocated or spent for the expenditures for the response so far. So the council will need to decide how to spend those resources. And they had a session, they heard from the county. I think some resources will go towards proposing covering county expenditures, particularly around the houseless, food security and contact tracing and contact tracing program that this county is putting in place. And then they heard about other requests. So each bureau submitted requests of kinds of projects that could be considered for CARES Act funding. We submitted a long list of options, but 6 specific requests, and 3 of them have been deemed eligible, potentially eligible. Of course, there are more requests than monies available. So the next step will be a committee of directors in which I will serve, along with working with the chiefs of staff from the city commissioners to develop some proposals that will be recommended to City Council for action. So the hope is to make some decisions relatively soon in the next month of how those CARES Act dollars will be spent. And of course, we hope that the Congress will pass the second CARES Act and potentially a stimulus package as well. So hopefully this is just the first tranche of resources that comes to the City of Portland and other jurisdictions to respond to the crisis.
Thank you. Can you tell us what those 3 items are?
Yep, the 3 items that were deemed potentially eligible. One was our request around anti-displacement, particularly to do some additional work looking at COVID impacted communities and actions there. Second is Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, along with the Office of Community Technology and Verde are working on the Digital Divide project. So it's to fund these technology packages, computer, internet access, and technological support, culturally appropriate technological support. And then the last one was around age-friendly. It's actually to develop an app to support elders in isolation, in particular the Black community.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And that's all.
Okay, great. Well, our agenda today is going to start off with the expiration date extension project, and then we're going to shift gears to the River Plan South Reach. And I think we'll get it all done within the time allowed we have today. The next project, the expiration date extensions project, affects applicants for development review projects. The changes affect a broad class of applicants and property owners. In the interest of transparency, are there any commissioner who'd like to declare a potential conflict of interest? I'm seeing a hand from Ben and from Kat. So Ben first.
Yeah, I just wanted to disclose that I work for an architectural and engineering firm that submits development review applications for the City of Portland.
Thanks. And Kat?
Sorry about that. I too am a architect. Okay, it's telling me I'm muted, am I?
No, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you. I too am an architect who works in the City of Portland and do also have some applications that may be affected by this, but I do not believe that those should cause any direct conflict of interest.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, then I believe it's probably JP McNeill from staff going to lead us through this code update. So I will hand the baton over to JP.
All right. Good afternoon. One moment, let me share my, oops. Julie, I'm unable to share my screen. Do you have my presentation?
Nope, 1 second.
While you're doing that, I gather the sequencing here will be JP can introduce us to the topic, and then we'll get some public testimony from people who are waiting to share that. And then we'll have a chance for deliberations and decide what we might want to recommend forward. So.
JP, you should be set now. Thanks.
think so. Can you see my screen now? Okay. All right. So good afternoon. Again, I'm JP McNeill with BPS. I'm here with me today, Sandra Wood, my colleague, and we're also joined by Shannon Buno, as well as Matt Wickstrom from BDS. And we're here to present the expiration date extension project. So this project will amend the zoning code to extend the expiration dates of several regulations to provide relief to applicants impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying economic disruption. So let me see here. So this slide shows the proposals, and these are the proposed code amendments we'll be covering today. And note that in addition to the 5 proposals that were in the proposed draft, we're also asking the commission to make 2 amendments that were not included in the proposed draft. And so, oops, there is only 1 shown on this, but there are 2. Hopefully I have the right presentation here. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to give a brief overview and then of each proposal, and then I'll stop and allow for questions from the commission. So here we go. So, and before we dive in, I apologize. I'm going to have to, I grabbed the wrong presentation here, and I am so sorry about that. I'm going to have to grab a different one. I do apologize. So here we go. Please tell me this is the right one. Okay. So.
While JP is doing that, Julie, I'm going to need to share a screen later too. So can you change my permissions to be able to share a screen?
Okay. Now I have this one. Okay.
And while JP is doing that also, oh, you're there. Never mind.
I'm here. Okay. I apologize for that. We have 2 amendments on there, and that's what I wanted to see. Okay, so before we dive into the proposals themselves, I want to give a little context for the project. So these proposals address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic at various stages in the development review process. So to help illustrate that, I want to give a brief overview of the process a big project that's coming into the city for review goes through. Please note that not all projects go through all of these steps. It depends on the size and the complexity of the project, among other things. Before submitting for a land use review, many projects go through some form of early assistance, whether it's an optional early assistance meeting with planners and other staff, or a design advice request that goes with the Design or Historic Landmarks Commission, or a pre-application conference, which is required for larger land use reviews. For most large projects, then after the early assistance, the applicant must also go through the neighborhood contact process. And this requires presenting the project to neighbors, the neighborhood association, to get feedback on the proposal before submitting your land use application, and in some cases, a building permit. The next step is the land use review. In this step, staff evaluates the proposal against the approval criteria in the zoning code for a variety of land use review types like design reviews or environmental reviews. And then finally, after approval of the land use review, applicants can submit for their building permits. So this project affects pre-application conferences, neighborhood contact, and land use reviews. And I want to point out that it does not impact building permits. There's no proposal to extend building permits with this project. And the reason for that is that BDS already has mechanisms in place to address building permit extensions. So, any questions on that? All right. So the first proposal, this is the pre-application conference changes. So, and just to note, so the proposals are ordered in the way they move through the development review process. So as I mentioned before, pre-application conferences, or pre-apps is what they're often called, and I'm going to refer to them here. They're part of the land use review process that provides applicants with technical, design, and procedural assistance before they submit their application. So for most big projects, a pre-app is required before submitting their application. And the application must be submitted within 1 year of the pre-application conference, or else it expires. So given the impacts COVID-19 is having on the development market, pre-apps may expire before a building permit can be submitted. So this first proposal is to address that issue. This project proposes to extend the expiration date for pre-application conferences for 1 additional year. So this would apply to pre-apps that occurred 1 year from when the public health emergency was declared, which is in March of this year, until through the end of 2020. So it's grabbing from March to the end of 2020, and those would be given, I apologize, actually, we're going back 1 year. So it's from March of 2019. So 1 year before the public health emergency was, so the pre-applications that happened 1 year prior to the health emergency, and then through this year, through 2020, all of those get 1 additional year. So instead of expiring after 1 year, they expire after 2 years. Any questions on that one? Okay, move on to the neighborhood contact proposal. So this proposal addresses the issues of holding public meetings during a time of social distancing. So allowing neighborhood contact meetings to occur virtually, it's one of the practices that has had to change since the pandemic hit. And BDS has been accepting virtual public neighborhood contact meetings to meet the requirements for neighborhood contact. And this just codifies that change. And so the proposal would allow neighborhood contact meetings held since the COVID-19 hit in March of this year until the end of 2020 to be held remotely using video conferencing technology, provided a phone option is also available. So any questions on that one? Clear. Okay. Okay, so the next one is the land use review
Hey,
extensions.
JP.
Yeah.
JP, we had a question from Katie, I think.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
That's okay. Katie, you're on mute.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. It's hard for me to find the spot on my computer.
No worries.
We're all dealing with that.
So anyway, I just wanted to ask, it sounds like it's already happening. When I went through it, I had some questions about this part. I was just wondering how the word gets out to the neighborhood. I mean, people are walking around a lot, so I can imagine that you would have some of the same reporting requirements, but then you would have what, a time and a date and a way to link into the meeting. Is that how they're making sure that the community knows about the meeting?
The idea would be to publicize it in the same way you would a regular in-person meeting, and through postings and however, but instead of saying meet at X, at the Multnomah Community Center at such and such time, there would be a way to get, say, a Zoom link like we're in now, and you would go to a virtual meeting, but you would also have to have an option where they could dial in in case people don't have access to a computer. Okay,
and is there, I mean, and maybe this is I just wrote down these notes and I said, but how did they get the word? How do you know they actually had the meeting?
That after they had the meeting, how do they prove that they've had the meeting?
Yeah, how do you even know they had it?
Hey, Matt Wickstrom, are you on the line that you can speak to this, since BDS has been already implementing this? He might not be here. He was
on the list right now.
Oh, okay. He was having trouble getting in. So when somebody comes in with their permit, to submit their permit, BDS asks for proof that the meeting occurred. And what was happening is that they were getting proof that a virtual meeting had occurred, and the code that didn't allow them to do that. With this code amendment, they can accept that virtual meeting occurrence.
Okay.
How they prove that, I'm not exactly sure.
I don't know exactly what they were doing.
I can imagine that they could maybe tape the meeting or, save the meeting.
Interestingly, it's probably easier to prove that a Zoom meeting occurred than a real meeting occurred, right?
Yeah, you could actually probably do verbatim.
Yeah, so I'm sure they have some administrative rules or some practices that they've been implementing for that.
Okay, and I hadn't realized that they'd already been doing that. And
they did as soon as March hit because, you know, how they didn't want to hold people up.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so this we're just catching up to that practice.
Yeah, so my questions are kind of behind. I was kind of thinking, oh, really? Are they good? Yeah. So, okay. Thank you. Thanks for answering those questions.
Sure.
Okay.
And Jeff, you had a hand, but you put it down? Okay.
Yeah, never mind. I'll pass.
Okay. So moving on. All right.
Participants.
Okay, so next up is the land use review extensions. This one's a little more complicated, so we have a graphic to help explain it a little bit. But to start, so the zoning code, it contains regulations that specify when land use review approvals expire. Most approvals expire within 3 years of the final land use decision. So due to the pandemic, the process of permitting has slowed down. Market conditions are uncertain, financing is harder to obtain, and construction timelines have generally just slowed down. So this means that some land use approvals will expire because it's more difficult for projects to move forward. So given these conditions, it's difficult for applicants to meet their deadlines, and it could increase project costs and delay, and could hinder the city's economic recovery. So to address these issues, the project proposes to extend the expiration dates of land use reviews and preliminary plans, which are subdivisions, approved between July of 2017, which is 3 years back from the effective date of the ordinance, and the end of 2020, and those would be moved forward to the end of 2023 or January 1st of 2024. So if you look at this, you can see that here in the blue period, that's the extension period from July of 2017 through the end of this year, January 1 of 2021. And all of them move to the end of that green arrow, which is January 1st of 2024, and that's when they would expire.
So a question about what's included in land use reviews. I think I heard or read somewhere that also includes design commission decisions. Is that correct?
Design reviews, yes.
Okay. And I saw a reference in the written testimony to master plans. Do they fit in this category, or are they a different beast?
That is a land use, what's considered a quasi-judicial land use review.
So a master plan that's extending during this period would get pushed out. Is that correct?
Master plans, for example, the one that is mentioned in the testimony, the Northwest Master Plan, that has its own expiration date that's built into that, and that's the code talks about that separately, and through that amendment we'll be talking about, because that is a 10-year expiration date, but that is still considered a land use review, and I guess it is a different beast.
Okay, so it wouldn't be covered by this particular piece of code that extends these.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, all decisions, so in Oregon state law, where planners at the counter are not allowed to make discretionary land use decisions. So the permits that come in, like the building permits that come in for a house, they are clear and objective standards, and they follow a check sheet, and it's just like check sheet, check sheet, check sheet, and it meets it. If there's any discretion involved, then it throws it into a land use reviews. And there are many types of land use reviews. There's environmental review, design review, a zoning map change is a land use review, a subdivision, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of types. There's probably, I would say, 40 different types, depending on what the approval criteria are and what we're trying to review. But the commonality is that they all are discretionary. And there's approval criteria and an opportunity for public input.
And most, but not all, like the master plans, have a 3-year expiration date.
Right.
And one more thing to note on the land use reviews is that this project is in alignment with another project for similar land use review extensions that were passed in 2009 and in 2012 in response to the 2008 economic crisis. So at that time, City Council, they first extended the expiration date for land use reviews that were approved in the lead up and in the early days of the economic crisis until 2012. And then when economic conditions didn't improve as they expected them to in 2012, they extended those further by another 2 years until 2014.
And I guess I'll pose a question, which is probably a foreshadowing, is that if someone submitted one of the many applications, a complete application by February 2nd to be vested under inclusionary zoning, and then they got the approval sometime after July 2017, then that would be in the batch where this extension would be covered?
That's correct. Yes. Are there any other questions on this proposal? Okay, and I will move on. The next one is a final plat extension for final plats. So the final plat process is the second step of the land division process, and it follows the approval of a preliminary plan. So land divisions are partitions and subdivisions. And final plats must be completed within 3 years from the time the city first sends their response to the final plat. So you submit a final application, final plat application, and the city responds usually with a request for information. And from that date, the applicant has 3 years to complete the application. And then within that, or the final plat, and then within that 3-year time frame, under the current code, the applicant is given 180 days to respond to the city with or otherwise make progress towards their final plat between correspondence. So you have 180 days from each check sheets, they're called, to make progress or to respond to the city to say that you're continuing to work on the final plat. And if not, then the city can void your final plat application. So this project proposes to give a little bit of flexibility within that time frame, and it would grant the applicant 365 days to respond or make progress on their application before it's voided. This change applies to all final plats that are submitted before January 1st of 2021, but it does not apply to those that have already expired or been voided as of the effective date of this proposal, and hopefully in July. Are there any questions on this one? The final proposal that was in the proposed draft is the inclusionary housing extension. So this is an extension for inclusionary housing provision rates. This one's a little different. It doesn't involve the land use process, but it does provide relief to applicants that were impacted by COVID-19. So the inclusionary housing requirements that are here on the screen here, these standards set the rate at which affordable housing must be provided for residential projects with 20 or more units. So the standards outside of the central city and gateway plan districts, they're lower than what's required within central city and gateway. And these lower rates are set to expire on January 1st of 2021. These rates have already been expired once. They were supposed to expire in 2019, and they were expired by 2 years until January 1 of 2021. So if you see here in Central City Gateway, the number of units, the percentage of units of your project are higher. You have to provide more units depending on the MFI, median family income, than you would in areas outside of the Central City and Gateway. And when this expires, it is proposed to at the end of this year on January 1 of 2021, then citywide, it would be that 10% of units at 60% MFI and 20% of units at 80% that's required in Central City or Gateway. So this project proposes to delay that increase in affordable housing rates that would be expiring, to delay the expiration in January 2021, an additional 3 years to January 1st of 2024. So any questions about this one? Sure.
I see Jeff.
Jeff?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions, Jimmy. Was this something our staff thought would be a good idea, or was this something the Housing Bureau asked us to do?
I think it was a little bit of both, the provenance of this. Sandra, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think Tom is on the call too. Tom Armstrong, as you know, is our lead for inclusionary housing. He had brought this to our attention and was wondering if we should include it with this. He worked with the Housing Bureau to make sure that they were supportive, and they were.
So I have one question, and Tom, I know you're going to appreciate this, and you probably knew I couldn't let something with IZ go by without a question. So if the decision was made that it's going to be beneficial to not increase the inclusionary housing rate for all the reasons we talked about, we want to make sure we want to do all we can to keep housing production going. So the decision is it will be beneficial to not increase the rate. Would it not be more beneficial to lower the rate?
And before he speaks, I'm going to say, not with this project, it wouldn't.
Right. Well, that's a political decision, not a policy decision.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we just identified that these lower rates were going to expire at the end of the year. And, you know, as you said, sensitive to the issue of increasing costs in the middle of a recession didn't seem like an appropriate thing to have happen. And we had a vehicle to just extend what we're doing now. I think you start to raise questions about what else can we do to decrease the cost of housing development. And I think that's a separate discussion and a more in-depth sort of policy trade-off discussion, similar to your comments about bird-friendly glass, that is sort of a larger conversation.
Fair enough. And I would only make the point that we have raised over the last going on 2 years of briefings from the Housing Bureau. We've been told we're going to do a deeper dive into IZ. We're really going to sort of analyze what's been happening. And we're still waiting for that. So, and I understand that the study that they talked about a year ago hasn't happened, or is that correct? They're not doing that study. Remember, they were in front of us about a year ago, and they said they've got money. They're going to do this sort of deeper dive into, you know, what's happened with IZ, the impacts of IZ. That, I take it that's not happened.
Yeah, it is on hold for a variety of reasons, both in terms of funding and staff bandwidth, and right now just turmoil and uncertainty regarding about what housing market are we going to study, because of all of the uncertainty over development right now. So now there's a question of timing and what market are we studying.
Okay, I've got a question from Oriana. Welcome.
Hi, sorry to be late. I'm actually going to surprise of no one, ask the opposite question of Jeff, which is to better understand how extending this exclusion affects affordability and displacement longer term. Like, we want to have a steady supply of housing, especially in this moment, and we don't want to stall construction. But as more and more people lose their jobs and affordability becomes more and more of an issue, don't we want more affordable housing? And not allowing this extension or potentially ending it earlier would seem to me to potentially increase the amount of affordable housing we could build at a time when it's necessary. So help me understand a little bit better how those dynamics work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the original reasons it's still in place today as to why we have this lower inclusion rate outside the central city and Gateway has to do with the property tax abatement incentives that developers receive. And that has to do with sort of the city-county agreement around and the cap on the amount of annual tax abatements that can happen in the city. And so in the central city and Gateway, projects are eligible for a 10-year tax abatement on the full value of the project. Whereas outside the central city and Gateway, the projects are only eligible for a tax abatement on the affordable units. So, you know, and this ties back to Jeff's previous question about the study and how much does cost of compliance with inclusionary housing how much does that, really affect, and is the bundle of incentives that the city provides cover that cost? We know when we first adopted inclusionary housing and these requirements, we knew that especially outside the central city, we were not covering the full cost of compliance at that time. And so that's why we wanted to have this introductory rate as part of that ramp up, and expectation that over time that property values and development pro formas would better factor in the cost of compliance. I think it is fair to say that there has been time. There's certainly a lot of turmoil and uncertainty in the market and in property values at the moment. And so you could argue that that we want to have this lower inclusion rate lapse, and have these higher rates take effect. I guess our bias was trying to sort of provide that certainty between you and between Jeff, which is, do we raise them? Do we lower them? What do we do? Let's just keep it steady with what we have right now until we have a better understanding of how we're recovering, how deep of a recession we're in, how much impact there is to the development market. And then we can revisit this question in a more comprehensive look at development costs.
Okay. I'm seeing Oriana and Jeff both having hands up, and I'm going to ask if it's urgent to say now, or we're running a little bit low on time to get through this topic. So if that's all right, let's go back to JP and continue on for us. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to move on from the inclusionary housing. Thanks, Tom. All right. And so these are the two amendments that we have to this that staff are proposing, and they're just minor amendments. One is the 3 years prior typo. So this one is there's many instances that we wrote, insert the effective date of this ordinance, and that should have said insert 3 years prior to the effective date of this ordinance. In several locations, I think they were all in the land use review approval section. And so this amendment is to just change that so that it says insert effective date of this ordinance.
Thanks.
And then, and after the public testimony, we'll share a list of where the amendment actually needs to be made. The second amendment is a list of terms typo. So this is actually when the Better Housing by Design project was adopted, the definitions chapter was amended to add new terms and definitions, but the list of terms chapter, which is 33,900, was not amended to reflect the new definitions. And so this would fix that. It would make a few changes. There are minor changes, and that's what this one is. Any questions on those amendments? Okay. And then testimony, we've received 8 pieces of written testimony, 6 testifiers registered for the hearing. So they'll be coming up next, and hopefully you were able to review the 8 pieces of written testimony. So our staff recommendation, we're asking the PSC to take the following recommended actions. To recommend that the City Council adopt this report as amended, recommend that City Council amend the zoning code as shown in this report as amended, recommend that City Council adopt the ordinance, and direct staff to continue to refine the recommended code language and commentary as necessary.
Thank you.
And that is it. This is just the project schedule. We're here today, and we're on the calendar to go to City Council on July 8th, and hopefully it will be approved and effective as of that date. So that's it for the presentation. Any other questions?
All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to practice bringing in our attendees to have public comment. So public comment is now open. We'll have 2-minute slots for people to speak, and we're not that well practiced at this, so I'm going to do the best and best we can. But the first person on my list is just a phone number. So sorry to be calling you by your numbers, but 503-250.
Eli, you should be calling in the order that I sent you earlier today based on when they.
Oh. Well, I have two screens going now, so let me.
Here, I can. So the first testifier should be Ian McKenzie.
Okay. I'll look for that note while you're doing that. Ian McKenzie, please. Do I need to allow him to speak, or you've already done that, Julie?
I got
it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
You're good, Ian. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ian McKenzie. I'm an associate with TVA Architects. We submitted a letter in support of this project. We really appreciate what BPS is trying to do here. The main issue that we raised was about the effective date and the amendment that was just mentioned. If that was adopted, that would actually entirely negate our concern. And I just really strongly encourage you to adopt that amendment along with the entire package. And then the other issue that we raised in our letter is just, for a lot of projects, it's not so much the expiry of the land use reviews, but the expiry of the building permit application. And that's more of a, I understand that's more of a BDS issue, but right now they typically make building permits expire after 6 months of inactivity. And that's just more likely to happen in the current environment. You can request extensions to that, but it's discretionary, and you can never be sure that that's going to be approved. So just as you transmit this to City Council, I'd really encourage you to give that message to City Council. And then part of the reason that's so important is that there's a new building code that came into effect in January of this year. That code wasn't even published in its entirety until October of last year. And so there's a lot of building permits that are under review right now that were designed in good faith to the old building permit or building code. And it would be really detrimental to those projects if their applications were voided. So anyway, thank you very much for taking this project on, and we're very strongly in support of it.
Thank you. And Julie, I've not yet found that email you sent. So I see, is Dawn?
Okay, so next we're gonna go with David Miner, and David must be the phone number that we see. So I'm gonna allow this one to talk, and hopefully it's you, David.
Hello?
Hello, please.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, geez. No, this is Matt Wickstrom from BDS. I guess I just, sorry, I must have signed myself in that way.
No problem.
I'm listening.
No problem.
That's the best I can do right now.
Okay. So it looks like David is not here. So Deanna is next. And Deanna, I'm going to unmute you right now. Go ahead.
Good evening. This is Dana Krafchek. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dana. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for accepting our testimony. I have two separate amendments that I'd like to talk about on behalf of two different clients, and we submitted written testimony and the text of proposed amendments. The first one relates to the Northwest Master Plan. There's only one, that's the Conway Master Plan, which is set to expire on October 2nd, 2022. We're asking that it be expired till January 1st, 2024. We've coordinated with NWDA, and I understand that the board met last week and voted to support the project. I've gotten confirming emails from them. I know they intended to submit a letter. I'm not sure if that made it into the record. We've also spoken with the other property owners and developers within the master plan, and Karen and Prometheus, who's developed a majority of the master plan area, support the extension. As we've described in our testimony, there's a variety of reasons for this extension. The master plan was adopted as an overarching approval with cohesive design guidelines, shared FAR, assumptions for financing a local improvement district for over $7 million of transportation improvements. And this extension will also ensure that the public park is included as envisioned. Essentially, this extension is needed to avoid piecemeal development for the last projects within the master plan. Commissioner Smith raised a question about whether or not the master plan would have been covered by the general extension. And quite frankly, I had that same question. But because the code section describes land use approvals generally and then lists specific examples of types of land use approvals, such as a conditional use master plan, we thought it would be more clear if the Northwest master plan was called out specifically.
We're running out of time, Deanna, so if you could wrap up, that'd be great.
Okay, and then it also provided us a chance to vet it publicly with NWDA. If possible, because I do have a second client and amendment, I just put it all into one letter. Could I have just another minute or so to talk about the other amendment?
30 seconds, so see what you do.
Okay, great. So the next one is about non-conforming upgrades. And this falls not into the discretionary land use review category. This is more like a building permit. The only difference is there is no opportunity to extend a non-conforming upgrade covenant like there is to extend a building permit. Some of you might be wondering, what is a non-conforming upgrade covenant? What it is when you do upgrades to a site, renovating a building, you can choose to upgrade all of the landscaping, pedestrian paths, etc., across the entire site without any limitations on the budget, as long as you agree to do it over time. The same COVID-related restrictions that are impacting development and land use permits is affecting the compliance with non-conforming upgrades. So we'd like the extension applied to those upgrades also. It's a technical fix.
Get the letter there.
Pardon me?
We did get the letter from you. That was fantastic.
Yeah, so it's a technical fix, but it's very meaningful for clients to avoid enforcement.
Okay.
Thank you
so much. All right. Julie, can you help me out? And you can just keep calling people. That'd be great by me.
Okay, next up is Allison. Give me 1 second. And Allison, you're all set.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, you're great.
All right, great. Hi, this is Alison Reynolds, also with Stoll Reeves, but here to testify with a different request than the ones that Dana just discussed. I too would like to express my appreciation for the city taking action on these important issues. So we are working with the developer of the Pearl East building at Northwest 13th and Gleason. Pearl East design review decision will expire in early July 2020 if they don't receive a building permit by that time. They filed their building permit application in November of 2019 and were on track to have the permit issued before that deadline. However, BDS was forced to prioritize essential projects due to the COVID-19 pandemic starting on March 13 and stopped its work on projects like Pearl East. While we support BDS's decision to prioritize these essential projects, unfortunately, this means that other projects are now in jeopardy of expiring since BDS and the other bureaus have no way of making up these lost months of review time. To address this issue for Pearl East and other projects facing the same dilemma, we're asking that the exception for land use reviews being proposed here under section 510, 730, 130B1B be backdated to begin on March 13 when BDS's process changed, rather than on the date the City Council actually enacts this ordinance. This aligns with the PreApp and neighborhood contact changes to recognize that March 13 is the day the impacts to projects began. And we've been working with the JP and the City Attorney's Office to ensure our amendment complies with state law, since that's important. And because counties are not allowed to enact retroactive land use regulations, but cities are, we are proposing to add a clarifying statement to the language that I provided in my letter that states that the March 13 retroactivity applies only to sites within the city and does not apply to sites in the portion of unincorporated Multnomah County subject to city zoning. Those sites would just be subject to basically what's in the ordinance right now without the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eli.
Awesome. Who is next?
Next up is Michelle, and Michelle, you should be all set.
Hey, Michelle, thanks.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yep, you're great, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you and good evening, Chair Spivak and commissioners at the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for bringing this project forward. For the record, my name is Michelle Vivas and I'm testifying on behalf of Douglas Wilson Companies. Douglas Wilson Companies is the court-appointed receiver for the property at 1400 Northeast Multnomah Street, which is approximately 5 acres in the Lloyd District across from the mall and is currently a surface parking lot. The project, a new multi-building mixed-use development including housing, was approved in September of 2016. Our role as court-appointed receiver is to enhance the value of the loan and ensure the project is consistent with city policy. This is a project that received the support of the Lloyd District, Sullivan's Gulch, and Kearns Neighborhood Associations. We find ourselves today in the position of finding a new developer for this project. Unless we are able to maximize the value of the permits, coupled with the economics of the loan, it is likely the property will continue to sit fallow for years to come. As the court-appointed receiver for this property, our responsibility is on behalf of the lender to preserve and enhance the value of the collateral for the loan. At a time in Portland's history when housing and commercial development are greatly needed to bounce back from the economic impacts of COVID, it is critical to protect local market asset value and capture development opportunities that translate into a boost to the local economy. The draft proposal would amend zoning codes for land use reviews to provide projects more time to endure the current state of the market in the midst of a great economic uncertainty that acknowledges the impact to city permitting infrastructure to ensure the development projects in Portland continue moving forward, which is critical to this economic recovery effort. To best achieve the goals of the expiration date extension project, we suggest that the code change grants the extension for land use reviews and preliminary plans for an additional year for projects approved between July 1st of 2016 and January 1st of 2021. We also support the comments by the Oregon Smart Growth on extending land use reviews for an additional year. We hope this feedback will be incorporated into—
I'm going to ask you to wrap up if you could. Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for all bringing this forward. And I'd like you to know that I have Doug Wilson here, the receiver, and we're happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Julie, who's next?
Okay, then we have, sorry, 1 second. Mary, let me second. Okay, Mary, you should be set now.
Mary, are you on?
Ready to be here.
There we go. Are you good?
Am I unmuted now?
You're great. Thank you.
Hi, this is Mary Coolidge. I'm actually going to pass, but thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Anytime.
Thank you. And then our final testifier is Ezra. And Ezra, you should be unmuted now. Sorry, 1 second. All right, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Julie, and good evening, Chair Spivak and members of the commission. It's nice to see you all here tonight, and thank you for working under these difficult circumstances. We really appreciate you continuing to move forward important pieces of legislation. We just want to express our support for the work that's before you tonight. I think as staff articulated, this is the type of work that we need, especially in difficult economic times, as shocks to financing kind of come to bear, and as we grapple with more difficult construction timelines and kind of concerns with wavering consumer demand. We want to ensure that projects in the pipeline are able to continue. I'd also like to note that we support the March 13th backdating, recognizing the fact that BDS grappled with some incredibly difficult technological issues, which inhibited it from processing applications at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to ensure that projects that were impacted then, but before the city took the steps declaring the emergency, are able to take advantage of the same continuations. So thank you again for your work on this, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Ezra.
So Eli, that is all of our testifiers. And if you want to close testimony, we can move on then.
I will close oral testimony on this, and I guess can I make a decision a little bit later on with discussion of the PSC whether to close written testimony as well? Or do we need to close written testimony before we deliberate? we have a process help.
Yeah, I think we want to close the written testimony.
If you're going to make your recommendation, you need to close it now.
Right, before we start deliberating.
Okay. Then I will close written testimony and oral testimony for this project. And I would like to ask if, I know some staff has been working like crazy to try and summarize some amendment ideas that have surfaced so far. Is there anyone on the commission who would like to, maybe I'll change the order on this. Staff, let's see what you've already assembled for us based on your reviews, and then I'll ask the commissions if staff has a complete list right now.
That sounds great. So that's my cue. Hi.
Hi.
I am going to share my screen. And I only have one screen here, so I'm going to try to move you all off of the screen so I can actually read it. So this is, can you all see that, or do I need to zoom it? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, zoom it.
Yes, we see it.
Oh, you see it. Okay. So we've heard testifiers advocate for different amendments. Why don't we get the two typo amendments out of the way? JP described both of these for us. Amendment number 1 is that we forgot to add these wording 3 years prior to the effective date of this ordinance in several sections of the code. And these bulleted lists shows you the several sections of the code. So we would appreciate if a commissioner makes a motion, moves this amendment, and if we could vote on this one first. And the motion would, yeah.
Someone can make that motion?
I move amendment number 1.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Boy, I can't tell who that was. Did someone say it again?
Second.
Ha, Jinx, you owe me a coat.
I beat you that time.
I think is that Mike?
I think it was Steph.
That was Steph, thank you. So Steph seconded it. The motion is to amend the 3 years prior typo, and any discussion? Okay, then Julie, let's please guide us through a vote.
Okay, Backrack,
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel,
Mute. Yes.
Nagnera,
Yes.
Routh,
Yes.
Schultz, Smith.
I'll just note that there's a typo in the typo. I assume in 2 places that should say conjunction, not conjunctions. But with that elucidation, I'll vote yes.
Great, and Spivak.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously, and let's go to amendment 2.
Great. So amendment number 2 is the list of terms was not amended during the Better Housing by Design. These several terms were added to the definitions, but the list of terms was not updated. So we would like someone to make this motion, please.
So this is not strictly COVID related. We're cleaning up something else.
This is not COVID related at all. This is, we were working on some update pages and noticed this discrepancy.
Okay, I'll move amendment number 2.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
Second. Hauk.
Second from Howard. Thank you. Any discussion?
I have a quick discussion note.
Yeah, Kat.
Just as a reminder to all that with this amendment, we have now opened this up to items outside of COVID purely related. So there'll be other amendments that will be a topic of discussion.
And to that point,
thanks staff for opening that up.
There is sometimes, we did not have to include this in this project. There are sometimes real typos that we see in the code, and Shannon Buno and I sit down and decide, is this a real typo, and can we show that there is that the legislation and the commentary and what council adopted really didn't mean for this to be a 2, it meant to be a 3, or numbering situations, and we correct those as typos. This, we made the decision, it's not really a typo, it's just a step barely above, and without another code I did not want to include it in residential infill, let's just say that.
Right. Well, I will accept it. Sometimes during COVID, we do cleaning house, and that's a little cleaning house. Are there any more discussion? All right, Julie, please call the vote.
Great. Backrack,
Yes.
Borlazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel,
Yes.
Manera,
Yes.
Ralph,
Yes.
Schultz,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. That motion passes. And now let's get to the additional ones that we're working on.
So this is an amendment that we heard from Commissioner Spivak that he might be interested in pursuing, so we drafted it up.
I can describe it.
Okay.
So I will make a motion that, and I'm sure the staff, I've not actually seen how staff drafted this up yet, so I'll describe the intention of it and we'll see how it
It's
goes.
this yellow part.
But I noticed from staff's summary of inclusion rates from of how far back this code project would reach, and noticed that developments that were entitled pre-inclusionary housing, and many projects were deliberately submitted just before inclusionary housing, would be expiring in, they would go through 2017, the end of 2017. In this project, we give those projects an additional 4 years to continue to not adhere to inclusionary housing. So my thinking was, I think that if the project has gone for several years already and not gotten a building permit, that it's unlikely that that was because of COVID. And I think that the Planning Sustainability Commission voted unanimously for inclusionary housing as the city council. And I think that to give those projects basically a 7-year period to perform seems excessive to me. And I think in practice, if a project at this point, and I'm sure someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is likely trying to shop the entitlement and trying to make a lot available for development, where without inclusionary housing applying, it would have a competitive advantage over another property on the next block over. And I'm not sure I support extending that competitive advantage for an additional 3 years. So my proposal is to allow projects to get the full 3 years that they were approved for with the original land use approval, but not provide that extension if the project would be, we're basically grandfathering in the pre-inclusionary housing entitlement for the project. I mean, I would say related to the other item on inclusionary housing, I do support staff's recommendation that we stick with the current percentages for additional time, mostly because we haven't had a chance to study it yet. So that's my proposal. And I think as I'm saying this, I'm looking at the language, and this exception does not apply to the final decision for any design review that was deemed complete prior to February 1st, 2017, and approved new buildings with 20 or more dwelling units or alterations to existing buildings that add 20 or more dwelling units. So I think staff's basically excluded projects that that would have been able to take advantage of the IH provision. I've also heard since bringing this up that there's some concern about process on this, that staff has not had a chance to reach out to those property owners. So if people think it's a good idea, we can discuss afterwards what to do, whether to be concerned about that or let people bring it up at city council. So I guess the question is, so I guess I'm proposing to exempt those projects from the extension. And first the question is there a second for that proposal?
And Eli, maybe if I can just add that if the commission does support this amendment, we would then recommend that we would have another, keep the record open, have another hearing, and allow people who might be impacted the chance to present their views.
Understood.
I'll second.
Okay, I didn't actually, who's saying that?
This is Ariana.
Oriana, okay, thank you. All right, then we can have a discussion. If people have some comments on this, I will, obviously I have an opinion on it, but I'm hoping to take some hands.
No, I really need you to explain it again. I'm not really sure what you're trying to do here.
Okay. I'm sorry, I did not do a very good, clear job of it. What I'm proposing is that, well, under the current proposed draft,
okay,
a project that's submitted before February of 2017, and then they got their building permit, and then they got their land use approval later that year, where they were not required to provide any inclusionary housing at all. Imagine that window of projects. There's about 8 or 10 of them, is what I've heard.
So you're talking about ones that are right now not required to have inclusionary housing at all.
Correct.
And
Because they were grandfathered in because they got in before the deadline.
following along the path, and they're going a bit slower than everyone else. Isn't that what you're saying? In fact, and you're kind of thinking that maybe they're going so slow that they're not actually getting anywhere. Is that what you're worried about, or what's the? So keep going now.
Thank you for giving me the chance to do that, because I'm not sure I was very clear the first time. There was a batch of projects that came in just before the vesting deadline, so they did not have to adhere to the inclusionary housing program.
I remember that.
Some of the projects in that batch would, under this proposal, get an additional, through 2024 to continue to not follow the inclusionary housing program. I'm proposing, but they still have a few more months to do it. They could do it today. I'm proposing that projects would have to, they would not get, they already have their first 3 years. I'm saying don't give them any more time. If they want to still do the project, then meet inclusionary housing.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
The project that has no housing in it at all, it would be irrelevant. Or under 20 units would be irrelevant. Did I summarize that satisfactory, Steph?
Well, I got it this time. So that was satisfactory to me.
I'm seeing some hands. So first from Jeff, and then Kat after Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Eli. A couple of concerns. I mean, let me just start by saying I sort of understand the equity of what you're trying to accomplish, Eli. But one, it will be a bombshell for a lot of property owners, developers. So I think, as Andrea said, it's going to force us to another round of public hearing, which will be another delay. And this is already a time-sensitive project. So that's one.
Can I put a question to that? A number meaning about 8 or 10, and a bombshell meaning they've already internalized that this project's going to pass as proposed?
I'm assuming, yes. Okay. But also, this goes back to a discussion we had earlier, that, there's just a lot of angst around inclusionary zoning. Is it working? Isn't it working? Is it discouraging more housing? And a lot of people, you and I, Eli included, have been asking this question for going on 2 years, and we keep getting stalled on a resolution, a study, an analysis, which was promised when IZ was passed. And so this feels a little unfair. This is sort of penalizing certain property owners, certain developments, when we still don't know the effectiveness of this entire program. And it seems like if we did something like this, it ought to come with an absolute assurance we're going to get this study that's been promised for 2 years. That's context, that's policy. I do have a suggestion if there's a desire to move this. It seems to me there might be a difference between those projects that got vested pre-IZ and have sat on them and done nothing for going on 3 years versus those projects that, like any other big project, is moving through the pipeline. Maybe it's going a little slower for whatever reason. And perhaps there's a distinction between giving this extension to those projects that are truly in process. I'm not sure what in process means. Maybe they've got a building permit, or maybe they're working towards getting a building permit, versus those projects that have just sat and done nothing and are trying to take advantage, the way you said, Eli, of marketing a piece of property that is more valuable because it's vested pre-IZ. So perhaps that could be a middle ground that would sort of address the equity you've raised, but not necessarily penalize a project that is trying to move through the pipeline.
Thank you. That would be a friendly amendment if it were possible to write that. I'm not sure it's possible to write it though. Kat.
That wouldn't be a reason not to do it if you think it's a good idea. We've got enough brain power in the conference. I'm sure staff could help us rate that.
Okay. Kat Schultz.
I'm going to start with just calling out this is a potential conflict of interest. My firm is working on projects that would be affected by your amendment, Eli. And so I beg to differ with your comment that there are projects that are in this group that have not been affected by COVID. So I can tell you they have been. And I can tell you the difficulty of Jeff's proposed kind of compromise or tack on, or I don't know how you want to call it, is that you would have no the city would have no way of knowing if we've been continuing to work on these projects, getting them towards building permit or not. And I can tell you that, like I said, there are projects in this group that have been continuing to try to figure out how to move forward and have been struggling with that and are having all the best of intentions. And they're going to get caught up in this.
Okay, thank you. I've got Ben and then Chris and then Oriana.
Thank you. So some of the comments I was going to make have been picked up by Jeff and a little bit by Kat. So what I'd say is it seems like, given the exceptionality of where we are right now, I would say that the intent of what we're trying to do is really to not create any obstacle to any future possible development, especially when it comes to housing. So I wouldn't necessarily differentiate between the enactment of inclusionary zoning as of 2017 or before. It seems like at this point, the overall intent of this is to remove that barrier. So I would rather not have an amendment.
Okay, Chris?
So let me ask the process question. If we have to extend this to an additional hearing, what does that do to the ability to make the July council date that's contemplated? That's a question for staff.
We would not be able, we'd have to find another date on council's schedule for later this summer.
That biases my decision quite a bit. Thank you.
And also, if I could just add, in terms of the context of the numbers, there are 10 projects that have not yet been permitted that were in that original bundle of 33, and the proposed housing that they would generate if they were built is about 2,200 market rate housing.
Thank you.
Okay, Oriana?
I guess first a follow-up question, which is, remind me so I don't have to do the math in my head right now, how many units of inclusionary housing were those projects to lapse and then fall under IZ? How many units would potentially be created?
44 if they came in with the same number and did 20%.
Thanks, Jeff. So I see the process concerns here, and I'm sure staff is feeling really nervous and maybe a little grumpy right now at the thought of like reopening the record and pushing things further with council, and also hear the concerns about the urgency of the crisis we're in right now. But I guess what's kind of sticking with me a little bit in this conversation is like, where are we putting the supports? And I know that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is not necessarily in charge of housing stock or supporting housing or affordable housing in the way that the Housing Bureau is, but I think we still have to ask ourselves, are we helping things at the top and hoping that housing supply and the market will trickle down and that will lead to more affordability? Or are we actually addressing the affordability issue that's coming up for so many families and really dealing with where the crisis is hitting in many ways hardest communities that are already deeply impacted? So I think where I lean and where my second comes from in just saying, where are there opportunities to create more true affordability and not just let the market solve things for itself? And appreciate if folks are not in agreement with that or frustrated with the vote that will come. But I think based on the positionality I hold on this commission and some of the values that come around who we are helping, I would like to see a package come before us that is more focused on helping the people who are going to be most deeply harmed. And everyone is harmed in this crisis, but there are some communities who are already being displaced and already losing their jobs and struggling to make ends meet in ways that I would hope we can focus in our decisions and our work more fully.
And Aria, I need to give a math correction. It's 440, not 44. So that even makes your case stronger for you.
You, Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay, are there other, I will say that I am, staff has asked that we open the record up if we take this on. I don't know that we, I think that traditionally, if people have, any amendment we do, it can have winners and losers, at least as perceived. And they oftentimes go to city council to register their discontent or their content with our finding. I understand that with this code project, to Chris's point and to Andrea's prior, is that the hope is to make this a clean project for city council, so they don't have a lot of people going, although based on some letters we received, that may be happening no matter what. So I guess I'm inclined, maybe we should do maybe can I ask for a straw poll on this? Because if we actually voted for favor, then we've got the whole question of participation. So I'm gonna ask people who tend to support this to put their hands up, their virtual hands up.
Hey, Eli, I just wanted to say that I'm just feeling like I should abstain, which I realize counts for probably a no vote. So I'm happy to leave the dais just to be really clean.
Okay, no, that's not, thanks for bringing that up. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm seeing 2 or 3 yeses, and if I put my, and I'm seeing by elimination, I don't think it's gonna quite carry. I'm just scanning through here.
Don't we have to vote on it if we have a motion and a second on it?
Unless I withdraw it.
Oh, okay.
Is that right? So I'm open to a process suggestion if someone has one.
I can't see all the raised hands, Eli. How many?
There's only 4, including Eli. So you either to ask for a roll call or you can withdraw your amendment.
Okay. I think I'm going to withdraw this amendment proposal. And if someone wants to introduce it, they can, but I think I'll withdraw this one. So if someone cares more passionately about it than I did, then they can bring it up. But I think I'm ready to try and get a package to City Council so we can address this.
Okay.
Okay.
Looks like we should move on then.
Then let's move on then. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more raised hands. So I'm going back to the document. So that was potential amendment number 3, which didn't pass. And I appreciate all of your deliberations and thinking about this. This was something that staff considered initially and was a tough call. So here's potential amendment number 4. This is an amendment that Commissioner Kat Schultz wanted to discuss. Is this still, did you want to propose this amendment? I'm sorry, we were hearing from so many commissioners and we were writing things up without knowing if it was really going to be proposed as an amendment. Commissioner Schultz.
So yes, I would like to still propose this as an amendment, but I'd also like to clarify again that yes, we have projects in our office that would be affected by this. I do not feel this one, unlike the last one, is as much a potential conflict of interest because the project that this would affect is already affected in other parts of this code package, which extends its entitlements, which kind of makes this not particularly applicable to it. But the reason I have brought it up is because I think it's a cleanup item that has more to do with the code.
And if you could,
I don't believe aligning with our intents.
Pat, could you do us a favor and just describe what it does? Because
absolutely.
Thanks.
So I'm trying to figure out how to make this real short. The city has a policy that, pre-applications expire within a year. Complex land use issues often take more than a year to get through, but it does not mean that the applicant isn't keeping a very good pulse on what is happening with the city. The city likes to have pre-apps to ensure that applicants are aware of code changes coming down the line. I would say the requirement of having to have a pre-application within a year, this is one of those items that goes back to, we keep talking about how to simplify things within the code and not making things so process oriented and onerous on applicants. And I just think it's unnecessary. and have seen this come up where all it came down to is fine. You're forcing an applicant to have yet another pre-application conference when it's not needed. So by extending it to 2 years, it just gives the applicant more time to get through a process without requiring something that's not necessary. So I'm also going to volunteer that I recognize this is not directly related to COVID. It is a cleanup thing, in my opinion. I would still like to make the motion, but am happy to have a discussion if people aren't supportive of it, to say, put this in the letter and ask for it to be taken care of at another time.
Thank you. So we have a motion. Is there, Chris, you want to say something now?
I have a question. First part of the question is, could we scroll down and see the whole set of language, since I only see part of it here? Okay.
We have two, we had written up two options.
Okay.
This option, or here's the or, this option.
So the second one is limited to the COVID time period, right? The first one is.
The second one is, the language that is underlined here in the second one is what we were proposing for the COVID time period. So anybody who submitted, the pre-application conferences held basically between this date in March and all of 2020 get 2 years. So a smaller number of pre-applications. And what we added for this amendment was the yellow part, which was pre-application conferences for master plans were valid for 2 years. In thinking it through with staff, we were like, why would master plans get 2 years and not other large type 3 land use reviews? And because pre-application conferences are only required for type 3s, instead of splitting the difference, we thought maybe all pre-application conferences should get 2 years and keep it simple instead of only master plans and only the COVID related projects.
And just a little background, I started with master plans just because they're very complex but I completely agree with staff that really any type 3, there is no reason to have it, in my humble opinion, be needed every year.
Okay.
I mean, I think this is one of those code provisions that is there to protect the few, the innocent, and is affecting so many more other people unnecessarily.
And am I correct in believing this doesn't affect the Northwest Master Plan issue? Is that correct?
It's correct, because the Northwest Master Plan issue, the pre-app was done way back in 2011.
That's about the extension of the plan, not about its approval. Do we have an amendment for that later on, or is that not on the table at the moment? Okay, all right.
Well,
then,
if someone wants to propose it, well, we drafted something.
Okay, glad to hear that.
I have a comment on this one, I guess, before we get a second, is that although the staff did open the door for non-COVID things, I feel like this does have, deserves more public process, and these clauses, either one of them don't seem to sunset. So it would be permanent changes. So although I'd probably be inclined to support more time for the pre-app, I'm not sure I like putting it in this project. But that's my 2 cents. Kat, you proposed a motion. Is there a second? I'm happy to hear a second if there's.
I'll second it.
Okay, Katie. So the motion is on the table. Any discussion?
Well, don't we have 2 alternatives? One.
Oh, I guess it's a good point. Kat, would you like to clarify which for both you want to present?
It would be on the first option, just to keep it clean and have all type 3s have a permanent 2-year time period between the first pre-app and when another one's required.
Okay, Katie, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I will second that.
Thanks. Discussion. I'm not seeing any.
I had a question, and I have a little hand up. Just what is there a counter argument to it? Is there a reason why we wouldn't approve this? What's the worst that can happen?
Well, I guess I'll share a counter. I think is that the impetus for this zoning code update is to deal with projects that were hampered by COVID, and we're trying to let the projects happen anyway. And this change to me feels like one that is more structural If you're doing a project, you do a pre-app conference, it's good for a certain amount of time. Under current rules, that's 1 year. And there could be an argument that CAT's made that we really need to provide more time for that. But this change would be in effect in perpetuity until the zoning code gets updated again. So the question is, are there winners and losers in that change of how much time is a project's allowed to go from a pre-app conference? How long it sticks for? And there might be projects, people want to hear what's happening in the neighborhood. They want to know what's happening. And if the, or actually, I'm sorry, the pre-app, I'm going to have to ask staff give the case for what the difference is between who the winners and losers are for 1 or 2 years.
JP, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, hang on. I'm getting myself on here. Well, I think that one point to make, there's a couple points. One is that sort of what Eli was saying about neighborhood getting public involvement and getting the community involved. And so the longer the time frame that goes out from when the time frame between that, but there's also the issue of codes and regulations changing and the timeliness of pre-applications. And so the further that you move the pre-application from the permit being submitted, the more that things can change over time. And often applicants are coming in and looking to staff for expected changes. And so could staff know what's changing in the future when you have it further out. And another is that just, the goal of this project is to keep projects alive and move things along and not to be making wholesale changes to the code. And so we're trying to move things quickly and not have things controversial that are coming up. And finally, the pre-application, well, I think that's all I have to say on that. But I think that it would be, if we're making this big of a change to the code, then it does open up, it needs to be looked at more holistically, I guess is the way to put it.
Eli, can I make a quick counterpoint?
Yeah, sure, Kat.
I'll try to keep it quick. First of all, the public process option, if this is for type 3s, there are more public process that comes along after the pre-app. So I don't think that it affects that. You still had public process. It's just a project in the works. The second one about, again, the code changes, any project that, like I said, I would say the majority of applicants, I've already stated this, are very closely watching any changes to any type of land use and or permitting for their projects, because that's part of our professional responsibility. So this is like a whole process added onto an application for the few who aren't in the know, or aren't, I should, in the know is not the right word to say it, aren't tracking well. But I have to say BDS's staff does an amazing job at supporting applicants through the entire process. So I just feel this is an unnecessary part of the process. I absolutely agree, as I started out saying, this may be extending the scope of this project more than certainly the intent, and I recognize that. But I still wanted to bring the discussion forward.
Okay. Oriana?
A clarifying question for JP. Do you feel like this will delay things with council if we were to move this as part of this package? If this pivot would potentially make this a project that is less viable and can't move at the speed that it may need to?
I don't think I can answer for what I think council will do, but I do think that this hasn't had any public process, and it's a fairly big change without a public process. So it follows that it could delay things because it's something that is bigger than what we were anticipating tackling with this project.
And I'll add to that is that the 1 year has been in the code for a long time. The reason we require pre-application conferences is so that the applicant can be prepared when they submit their land use reviews. So if they haven't been prepared in 2 years, definitely a lot of things could change in that time period. I don't think the public necessarily would push back on us, Oriana, because they don't really participate in pre-application conferences. They see them, so then they can see what's happening. If we got pushback, I would anticipate it would be from the service bureaus, because this isn't just a conference between BDS and the applicant. It's with the Housing Bureau, it's with PBOT, it's with BES on all of the stormwater issues and that. And, you know, there's codes that we're changing, and there's also administrative practices that they're changing. And that's the type of information that they provide at these pre-app conferences.
Right.
May I follow up?
Oriana and then Steph. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think my initial thinking was along the lines of, this makes some sense. We've already opened up this project outside of its intents in a slight way to make a small technical fix. This may not be such a technical fix, but my organization has gone through a pre-application conference with a solar project we've done, and as a result are following things pretty closely, that it feels like it's in some ways a good faith effort to begin tracking a project and doing the work that is necessary. So I would believe Kat and trusting that most folks who are doing a pre-app conference are going to follow things well after that. But I think where I veer now in terms of this may be just too outside of the scope is that concern coming from Sandra around if other bureaus are going to feel like this is going to impact their work negatively, then this feels like something where we may need some more internal process to address. It's hard to have the code open and not make a change that makes a lot of sense and will ease projects and may ease them in ways that are not directly COVID related, but will take tension off of a situation that is already just very, very tight and pressured from all angles. So I guess I was initially leaning in favor, and now I feel like we should probably avoid the internal issues that may come up for the city in moving this quickly as a part of a project that needs to move quickly.
Okay. Steph?
Thank you. I mean, I've also been in this conversation weighing between like, is this housekeeping? Is this more substantive? I guess maybe a question, assuming that there are impacts that this is something that may need to be revisited, because that question is now on the floor. Like, if this were not to move forward today, is there a mechanism like when might be a future conversation where we could look at the pre-application conference validity?
Eli, if I could just respond to that. I think we can absolutely look at this issue. I don't know quite what package it would be. We'd need to find kind of the right zoning package to bring it, to align it with, but we can absolutely look at this and would want to kind of take the time and have the kind of input from folks who would be potentially impacted. So if the commission is interested in us taking further look at this, we can do that and share more about kind of timeline and what package we could bring it back with.
Okay. I'll weigh in that I've become convinced that it's really an internal discussion for the city. And if we recommended this for inclusion with this amendment, then city council could hear backlash from the bureaus in-house, and they could just strip it right back out of the project. So I'm kind of inclined to let that process unfold, so that I'd be supportive of it. Any other comments? Then I see Ben, and then we'll wrap this up and try a vote.
Well, like other commissioners have been going back and forth on this, on whether, this really pertains to the issue at hand. Well, really thinking it through, I do think there is public process after the pre-app to guarantee that the public has a chance to weigh in. So that to me is not as much of a concern. And although I don't think I have a direct conflict of interest, I am involved in quite a few larger projects and master plans, primarily outside of Portland, that at any point in time can get stalled or slow down significantly and then pick up again. And that's due to the nature of a complex project. So giving an extra year, quite frankly, may seem like a lot of time, but for large projects that have a lot of moving parts is, I think, an extra, perhaps one last one less thing to worry about, quite frankly. So, and yes, codes do change, and you may have to go back anyway. So I think it's an element that is still in the spirit of what we're doing to provide a little bit more flexibility, especially for projects that have the ability to be really transformative. So I'm inclined to say yes.
All right. Julie, let's take a vote.
Okay. Backrack.
I think I'm yes. I'm just clarifying. We're going with the first proposed amendment, 2 years across the board, no sunset, correct?
I was supposed to say that to myself, so yes.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Yes.
This one.
Okay. Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Larcell.
Yes.
Manera.
I'm a no for process concerns, but I do support those coming back in a future package and this being a continued conversation.
Great, thank you. Rouse.
I'm saying no for the same reasons, but it's substantive.
Okay. Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
I'm in the same place as Oriana and Steph. No.
Okay. Spivak.
I'm going to appreciate that I'm not the only person who sometimes does scope creep, and I'm impatient, and I'm going to say yes. And if there's process issues, I think it's likely to become between the bureaus, and City Council will hear about it between now and then. So I will vote yes. So that passes 6-3, and let's move on to the next one.
Just kind of do a quick time check. We're about 35 minutes behind, and two of our guests will have to step off soon, who are joining us to talk about South Reach and houselessness issues. So I just wanted to, can we wrap this up in the next couple of minutes? I don't know how many more amendments we have for consideration.
Well, we don't have any other amendments from commissioners. We had drafted amendments based on the testimony that we received, 2 amendments. This one is about the non-conforming upgrades option, which I think will require some conversation because commissioners need to get up to speed on what non-conforming upgrades are and what option 2 is. The last amendment is the Northwest Master Plan. So maybe a way to do it if any commissioners wanted to sponsor the non-conforming upgrades option 2 amendment, we would know we'd need to spend time on that. If none of you want to sponsor that, then we can just move on to the master plan one, which sounded like Commissioner Smith was interested in. And that would be a quick
sponsor the option 2 because I think it ties right into what Chris is going to be proposing on the Northwest Master Plan.
You do want to sponsor that one?
Yeah, sure.
So that means we have
I saw the crestfallen look, Sandra, but I think it goes with the other piece of the pie. Sorry.
Question of timing. If our next meeting is on the 9th of June, it's hitting to City Council on July 8th. If we gave ourselves more time by going to that meeting for this topic, would we be able to keep the July 8th City Council date?
Well, at this point, I also, there's a couple of things. I only have 1 hour reserved at City Council. I really thought this would be a really fast package. So if this is an indication of how City Council is going to go, we might be losing July 8th anyway. Andrea, sorry, I hadn't shared that. I only had an hour for that meeting and I don't know what else is on the agenda. No, if we come back on June 9th, to make July 8th, we actually have to file for council on Tuesday of next week.
Could we come back to these? Could we go on to South Reach and then come back to these 2 at the end of the meeting if we have time?
That's a good idea. That way we can take our guests being here.
You all can. I'm in Central.
Not be available.
Who won't be available?
You.
Yes, unfortunately, I'm in Central Oregon and I need to start making my way back to Portland so I can be at work tomorrow morning.
Can I ask a process question?
Yeah.
If the commission was to say we support the concept of extending the time for option 2 and extending the time for the Conway Master Plan, could we just vote to do that and allow you to draft the actual language to take to City Council? Or do we actually have to approve the language?
You have to approve the language, but I also think commissioners will not be able to say whether they support it or not without understanding what it is.
I understand. I just wonder if we get there, you're saying because we're not going to have, well, can we have language for tonight, or is that just not?
Well, there is language in front of you.
Okay.
I kind of like Chris's suggestion that we go to Southreach and we come back to this. I have several staff actually on here. So Shannon Buno is our senior code writer, and she knows this stuff in and out. JP is the project manager for this, and he knows these code issues too. So we only have these two to work through. And then Tom is here to help also. So I would be comfortable with my staff handling this after the Southreach portion of the meeting.
Plus language was submitted by the advocates for it as well. So.
Okay.
So as a reminder, I would be stepping away from the Southreach discussion, so I can come back, but somebody will need to get a hold of me to figure out when I come back.
We'll text you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting a text from Mark Joel and they can come back, but I like Chris's suggestion. I think I like to take you up on that. And so I will continue the discussion on the expiration date extension project for about an hour and a half from now.
That sounds about an hour and a half. You think you'll do Southreach?
Well, I'm not sure how long Southreach will take, but I guess I'll continue it to later in this meeting. I'm not sure if I have to say that officially, but.
No, you don't. Yeah, so that's fine. That sounds great. Shannon and JP, are you both available around 8, and maybe Tom?
Probably more like 8:30, just so you know. And I mean, in terms of what Southreach has to get through.
I'm available.
Can people stay this long? I guess that's a question for commissioners.
I can come back. I can just leave it on and listen while I make dinner in the kitchen.
Sounds good. So you are in very, very good hands with JP, Shannon, and maybe even Tom if he's available. But with the two of them, they've been thinking about this.
Okay, thank you. Have a good trip.
Thank you so much.
Eli, I'm sorry if I could just ask one question. So we've just deferred looking at these two amendments till later. There was a third, I don't know if amendment's been drafted, but I believe it was brought up in some written testimony, and it might have been brought up in verbal testimony. I was offline for a while with the internet problem. The idea of backdating the effect of this whole package to March of this year when the COVID crisis hit. I know Sandra explained there might be some legal problems with that, but I wasn't sure if that's on the table for consideration or not.
So we don't have an amendment drafted for that. And let me explain that before I get going. Sorry, let me just it'll take, I think, 2 minutes. The last two times we did this project in 2009 and 2019, in 2012, we noticed that we didn't do it retroactive. And we looked into it and it was clear it said some state laws didn't allow us to do retroactive and resuscitating projects. So the issue Jeff is talking about is, let's say a project came in January of 2017 and it expires in January of 2020. It's already expired, that land use review. So we can't now pass a different law that goes and resuscitates that project that is already dead. So one of the pieces of testimony you've gotten was, oh, but maybe we can. When we talked to the city attorneys about this, there was two, and this was their cursory reviews of the Oregon Revised Statutes. One said that cities are prohibited from adopting retroactive ordinances in the context of land divisions. So it was not all land use reviews, it was only land divisions, and that's like subdivisions and partitions. The other one was counties are not allowed to do retroactive ordinances. And that's what the person testifying was saying, oh, but if we only put it in the code, that this wouldn't apply to the county pockets. Then we've solved the county problem. We still don't solve the land division problem. And yes, we could add, it wouldn't apply in the county pockets. It wouldn't apply in land divisions in these cases, et cetera. We opted not to do that because we think it just becomes much more complicated resuscitating old projects that people thought were dead. And then the question becomes, how long ago? If a project expired 5 years ago, do we resuscitate that project? I know that the testimony was, oh, do it those projects that expired after March 8th, I believe, is their request, because that's when the state of Oregon, the governor declared a state of emergency. And so that would be a way to keep parameters on it. But those were the reasons. We have two laws about the counties and land divisions that make the code language complicated to write.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to try and improvise here a little bit and switch gears to the River Plan Southeast project. I will note that we've had a request, as you got it by email from City Council, from the Mayor's office, to open the oral record on this project for our a forthcoming meeting, probably 2 meetings from now, out of concern that some people who were confused a little bit by this project, wondering about the impacts, whether the project scope included the river itself or just the areas along the river. Some people who have strong opinions about the river did not weigh in, and when they saw the letter from the PSC to the Oregon Marine Board, expressed concern that they hadn't had a chance to speak up. And we were clear in that letter, I think, and in our discussions internally, that our recommendation is just Title 33, and we were just sending a letter as a one of many bodies to the Oregon Marine Board. But there still is a pretty strong demand to speak. So we will have this project coming back to us in a couple weeks. But
June 23rd. June 23rd is confirmed.
Okay, thank you. For now, we'll still go through the exact same order that we discussed, that you have your materials in. And we will, though, however, be doing straw polls instead of votes. Oh, I'm sorry. Take it back. We are going to do actual votes on it. And I'm also seeing notes from Mark Jolan that if it would be helpful to get through this project and then back to the expiration date extension project in this meeting, we could postpone the discussion on houseless residents until that future meeting on the 23rd, which would be, and we could have Mark Jolan available and I think additional staff to participate in that meeting. So in terms of time management, I think that between Jeff and Sally and Debbie, you have an idea of how long this portion of the meeting will take. You would have the opportunity to push that to the 2 weeks from now.
Eli, I just want to note, because we had testifiers waiting for a recommendation from the previous project, that you are all welcome to stay on this call. You're also welcome to watch on YouTube for when we return to that project. Either works. I just want to acknowledge that we have people waiting for that recommendation.
Thank you for that. And I know Kat will be stepping off for this discussion of the South Reach, and I can give you a text, Kat, when we get back to this first project.
She's gone already. And just one point of clarification for the commission, you will not be taking final votes on the project today. You'll be taking straw polls.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Then with that, I will turn it over to Sally, Jeff, and Debbie Bischoff.
Thank you, Eli. Eli, it's your recommendation that we hold off on the houselessness until next time. Sounds like.
I think that if we're running out, if last time we were way ahead of schedule, this time we might not be. So I think we should probably push that forward to 2 week meetings from now.
All right, then just I'll go over a couple of things very briefly, and then we'll move into our next special guest. But we're here today to go through a few more amendments on River Plan South Reach, and you've received materials in 3 different days. You got a packet on May 15th, another one on May 22nd, and then you got 2 items today. So as staff present to you, they will direct you to which packet in case you're keeping it in separate packets so that you can follow along. As Eli said, we'll be doing straw polls. So I think rather than go through anything more, I will just move on to the first item. So Jeff, can you please share the PowerPoint?
Sure.
Our first topic today, now that we are not going to talk about houselessness, is tribal engagement and collaboration. And we have with us today Laura John, who is the Tribal Relations Director for the City of Portland. She is someone who and many of you wanted to have come and speak with you. So Laura has been able to, is able to join us today. So once Laura speaks, I'll come back, talk a little bit more about our tribal engagement, and then we'll turn it over to Nicholas Starren, who will walk you through the archaeological protection amendments. So Laura, are you there? Join us.
Hi, yes, thank you for the invitation. I apologize, I'm going to not use my video because my service is really poor right now. So you'll be able to see our slide here. I'll go ahead and get started.
But this is Laura wearing the burgundy jacket. Two down from the mayor. So hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, Chair Spivak and commissioners. First off, I would like to thank the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for inviting me to speak to you this evening about the city's tribal relations program. This program serves to build and strengthen the city's relationship with sovereign tribal nations and to create a means for regular government-to-government engagement. This particular program has come to fruition in response to a city council directive in 2012, which was Resolution 34961, titled Formalize Government Relationships with Tribal Government Partners and Establish Government-to-Government Consultation Agreements. During this time, there were several issues on the table that made it clear to those city council members that we needed to do a better job at communicating and partnering, collaborating, and making sure that we were doing what we could on our end as a city to respect tribes as sovereign nations. So this resolution stated that it would establish a policy for the city to implement programs and activities within the context of honoring and respecting tribal treaty rights, federal tribal trust responsibilities, traditional native religious beliefs, and maintain relationships with tribal nations to achieve positive, mutually understood, and beneficial solutions that respect tribal sovereignty. The city recognized that in doing this work, in preserving treaty rights, protecting cultural heritage, and in particular, the ability of future generations of Native people to practice their traditional lifeways, that it absolutely must partner with tribes in order to protect these very valuable, priceless, and irreplaceable cultural and natural resources. Over the past 2 years, the Office of Government Relations, we have worked to create a framework for the Tribal Relations Program that can be interwoven into the fabric of how the city operates to provide a strong internal structure that helps to establish and maintain those relationships with tribal partners. And as a side note, that's not as, I think, related to what we're talking about tonight, but also to improve the city's service to the urban Native community. So over the past 2 years, we've done a lot of work. We have had 2 tribal nation summits. Those summits welcome delegations of elected leaders from the Warm Springs, Umatilla, Cowlitz, Siletz, Grand Ronde, Yakima, and Nez Perce tribes. We have been to formally visit 2 tribes. In December of 2018, we made a visit to the Umatilla tribe over near Pendleton. And this last year, we went to visit the Yakima Nation. And so there's been a lot of work done and a lot of things happening throughout the bureaus. One of the tasks that I have as the Tribal Relations Director is to advise internally the 6 elected offices and 26 city bureaus. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of different moving pieces. And one of the things that has come up quite frequently is how can the city ensure, again, that we're upholding treaty rights? And I think for the city, it's also around reducing risk. We would be held responsible if we were to violate treaty rights. Treaty rights come in a lot of different ways. So that may be usual and custom gathering, hunting, fishing locations. It could be potential impact on water quality, air quality that impacts cultural resources that are harvested, gathered, or hunted for by tribes as a protected treaty right. And also includes ensuring that we are following state and federal law when it comes to things like inadvertent discovery. That particular area of work is a significant concern for the tribes. During this last year's summit, and also when we went to visit tribes, it was really clear that having an inadvertent discovery plan, making sure that we have the right language for the city is of significant importance to the tribes, and that they do not feel as though this is done enough or at the level of depth that it needs to be done at. So I wanted to specifically speak to how I have supported BPS as the Willamette South Reach plan has been drafted. We did take information that we, feedback that we received at the different summits. This last year during the intergovernmental review process, period, there was a boat tour. I worked with BPS to ensure that we had elected tribal leaders included in that. We ended up having 2 chairmen and other elected leaders. So we had 4 tribes represented, as well as Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. So we've really been trying to build that bridge to invite tribes to give us feedback on plans like the Willamette South Reach. So this was a great opportunity to sort of pilot that outreach. One of the other things that we did is we arranged for a discussion during this last summit. So last November, the city held its 2nd annual Tribal Nation Summit, and we welcomed delegations of elected leaders from those 7 tribes that I had mentioned just a minute ago. During the summit, we coordinated a series of focused discussions that brought together city and tribal leadership that was intended to foster dialogue to gain a deeper understanding of the interests and cultures of tribal nations, create a space for engagement, and really begin to put in some action to build relationships and rapport and open that door for future collaboration. So what we heard in that discussion with tribal leaders is, one, that the entire Portland area was heavily used due to the confluence of the rivers and the abundance of resources that existed here in Portland. And specifically, caution that we need to be aware that it is likely to find protected archaeological items, former village sites, burials, so on and so forth, anywhere in the city, and that we needed to be prepared and to ensure that those protected items and sites would be treated with respect and with and in accordance with the law. Tribes said that they are constantly looking for institutional tools to protect culturally significant areas. And this included, they mentioned easements and zoning and a host of other suggestions, and did give us guidance that it would be ideal for the city to put in an inadvertent discovery plan with tribes, so that should there be something to surface during development, that it would be handled properly, and that we would have those existing relationships with tribes, potentially affected tribes, that we could pull in, and also that we are ensuring that something wouldn't be destroyed. And that has happened in the past during development in the city. And I would say in a recent record would have been in the 90s under the Katz administration. There was a site that was discovered and unfortunately had fill put over it. There was a good outcome, and that was because there were relationships with tribes. The tribes came forward, and so I feel like there is some real opportunity to look at what we did there in the past, and then to identify where we need to extend that. And so I don't want to take up too much time because I know we're out of we're sort of over the schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nicholas, or back to Sally.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura. So this is just a brief summary of some of the engagement we did as part of Southreach. We created a brand new draft. You've heard about a discussion draft and a proposed draft and a recommended draft. Well, we created an intergovernmental review draft that we released before the discussion draft. And that allowed tribal governments and other government agencies to provide us with comments early on. And that was very well received. Laura talked about the mayor's boat tour. That was done in conjunction with the intergovernmental review draft. Laura took staff out to the Warm Springs reservation where we met with their staff there. I went on a diplomatic visit to Yakima and presented Southreach to the Tribal Council. We met with CRITFIC, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, had meetings with the Umatilla and the Grand Ronde. Laura talked about the tribal summits. And then we worked with Judy Blue Horse Skelton at Portland State to organize a whole evening called Integrating Native American Voices into Southreach Planning. And we had a wonderful event with a native caterer and the like. So we did quite a bit of work. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas, and he will talk about some of the work we did with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and others leading to the archaeological recommendation we have for you. Nicholas, take it away.
I'm going to jump in. Mike has a question, I think, and then we'll switch. Do you want to jump in, Mike?
Yeah, comment. You know, during the West Hayden Island issue, we're going back several years, we had folks from Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission and other tribal representatives actually testify to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. And I'll tell you, it had a big impact on the commission and on our deliberations. And the question to Laura is, do you envision, is it conceivable that if there's an issue that obviously is of interest to the tribal representatives, that they would come directly to the commission, or are all of those, is all of that input given via the kind of vehicles we're hearing about now? Because it was really had a big impact on our deliberations.
I think that there are multiple sort of doors for tribes to provide comment. What we are talking about tonight is formalizing that so that it's standardized and is really taking it a step further to say that it's not the responsibility of the tribes to monitor what's going on, rather for us to be doing that outreach so that they don't need to bring concerns to us, that we are ahead of the game, that we're being proactive rather than reactive.
Thank you. And thanks to staff for making sure there's opportunities for being very proactive as well.
And just one other thing, because because these are governments, the possibility of them testifying at council would be more likely, I would think, than at the PSC, because it's that formal government to government relationship.
Understood. Nicholas.
Good evening. Nicholas Starn here. I'm going to speak tonight about the archaeological resource protection measures and the amendments that you should have in replacement decision package table C that I believe you received on May 22nd. But before I get to the amendments, I just wanted to outline a little bit how we got to where we are and go over some of the things that Laura hinted at a moment ago. As she said, we heard through a number of venues, including the tribal summits, the strong desire from tribal partners to include an archaeological resource protection element in the plan, something that wasn't initially scoped in the plan. And so we began that work by hiring an archaeological consultant, Willamette Cultural Resources Associates, that research archaeological site records and historical accounts, and actually developed an archaeological probability model based on work that had been done in the North Reach for the Superfund site. And what this model identifies is the areas in the South Reach where subsurface Native American archaeological resources are more likely to be found. So you see that in the map in front of you in the areas in red, what we call a high probability area, based on a number of different factors. Those are the areas where archaeological resources are most likely to be found. So as we continue doing our work developing the new zoning provisions, as Laura mentioned, there was in the 1990s, there was work done along the Columbia River, along the south shore of the Columbia River, where there are some known resources. And there are actually some existing provisions in the zoning code that are meant to protect archaeological resources. So a lot of the work that we did is based on provisions that have been in the code in a different part of the city since the 90s and have worked fairly well. And in addition to a lot of the outreach that Laura and Sally mentioned, we worked rather closely with the State Historic Preservation Office, the Oregon Legislative Commission on Indian Services, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the specifics and the details of the zoning code provisions that are in the proposed draft. So we can go to the next slide. So before I get to the amendments, just to give you a high-level overview of what are in the archaeological protections in 475.245, there are basically two primary elements of the provisions. The first is the requirement prior to ground disturbing activities in the high probability area, that area in red, a property owner, and an example of a ground disturbing development is like digging a new foundation or laying a pipeline, something that's going to get into the ground. Prior to doing that, the property owner is required to hire a qualified archaeologist to do a survey to determine whether there are any archaeological resources on the site. In most cases, there will probably not be any resources identified on the site. And in those instances, development can continue along the sort of usual path of the development process. In the event that a resource is identified, the site will be work stops. The site will be further investigated. The resource will be identified and classified, and then depending upon the type of development that's being proposed and the type of resource that is identified, the development is either prohibited. So a good example being if a grave is identified, further development would be prohibited, or it's allowed to proceed. And there might be some, adjustments to site planning to avoid the resource and that sort of thing. And in many instances, there's a requirement for there to be a memorandum of understanding, which is executed between the property owner, State Historic Preservation Office, and at least one appropriate Native American tribe. And then that memorandum is an opportunity to address site planning, protection measures for the resource, site monitoring during the development process, recovery of artifacts, those kinds of things. And I guess I could pause there to see if there's any questions about the main elements of the proposal, and then I'll get into the
We
amendments.
should jump to the amendments.
Okay, next slide, please. So again, replacement decision table C contains 3 identified issues and staff proposed recommendations for amendments. The first relates to how the word appropriate tribe is identified in the code. There are Native American tribes with ties to Portland and interests in land use here that are not actually headquartered in the state of Oregon, a good example being Yakima, the Yakima Nation. And we are proposing an amendment to the code that really makes explicit and allows for tribes with interests in Portland land use to clearly allow them to be a part of the processes identified in the plan, or in the code rather. The second one, C2, we are just proposing to amend the code commentary to more explicitly outline how the measures support state and federal archaeological resource protection measures. And then finally, C3, we're proposing a technical fix that adjusts some of the code language to be more consistent with the state historic preservation office's practices and their use of terminology, so that there's a clear correlation between like concepts and practices.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll first ask if there's any questions, and after that, if they're not, I'll ask people to get your hands raised. So first, any questions? Okay, please raise your virtual hand if you would like to straw poll support these staff recommendations. Okay, we're getting good. So I'm up to 5 plus myself. We're at 6, and I think that we've had to lose. Oh, I see. It looks like it's unanimous. So we will support these recommendations for the code packet that will come to us in 2 weeks. And thank you so much for joining us, though, Amy. What is next on the list?
Debbie.
Good evening, commissioners. We have a few recreation topics tonight on the agenda that are found on Table B continued that you received in your packet, as well as Memo B11 Part 2 on residential docks. Before I begin, there are 2 items in Table B continued that are not marked for discussion. We did receive a request from Commissioner Houck this morning for a new action item that was based on B17. So I'd like to go over that real quick in the next slide. And then if you are good with that, or if there's any discussion of B16 through 18, or we could entertain that. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, next slide, please. So Commissioner Houck would like to see submerged lands historically owned by Ross Island Sand and Gravel become in public ownership. This is for land, submerged land that's around the Ross Island area, very close to Ross Island. And this action, we have talked with DSL and Portland Parks and Rec, and they're okay. It's been reworded from what Commissioner Houck had sent to us in the morning. But basically, it's looking to explore ways to regain public ownership of these private lands in the Willamette River and Holgate Channel. And part of the reason for this is a lot of the liveaboard boaters are anchoring on this private property. And Ross Island Sand and Gravel has not consented to enforcement actions. And so that certain issue is been prevalent. So anyway, this is a proposal. It's a new item B18 action. And so I would entertain if the commission is fine with this, and the other 2 B16 and 17 recommendations, we can move on, or you would like to discuss them.
I'm seeing comments from or questions from Jeff and then Mike. Jeff, would you like to start? Jeff Blackrock? All right, Mike.
Yeah, the fact that Ross Island owns this land is really a bizarre anomaly. I'm not aware of any other case where the submerged lands is in private ownership. So it's an issue, a philosophical and policy issue, that this is a public resource. And I was pleasantly surprised that DSL, after an inquiry from Debbie, indicated they would actually be open to having a conversation how this might occur. And as was pointed out, there's the state and the Multnomah County Sheriff have no ability to regulate in that area because Ross Island Sand and Gravel owns it. I think this is really important public policy issue.
Okay, thanks. Let's do, Jeff, are you here? Yeah, I think Jeff just had his hand up just to say he's in favor of anything we decide to straw poll on going forward. So with that in mind, let's do a straw poll for new item B18 that Hawk recommended. Please put your hands up if you'd like to support that. Everyone's getting faster. I think this will be something we include in the code language when we bring this back in 2 weeks. So let's go to.
There's still a few more recreation. We have one big recreation item, which is the residential dock recommendations. So you have before you revised recommendations for residential docks, and you'll see our recommendations with specific code language in the memo B11 part 2, which you received on Friday. The first recommendation talks specific, and first the considerations. These reflect the intent of what we're trying to achieve with these new residential dock regulations. So I'm not going to read them all. We can move to the next slide. So there are 5 recommendations that we have for you tonight. The first one is about, it's a new dock development standard, and it's updated from what is in the proposed draft. We've clarified the purpose statement. We're limiting the size of the floating boat docking structure to 200 square feet. And we are saying that new docks, that this floating dock structure cannot locate in shallow water habitat. It could be considered, an applicant could seek a modification through river review, but it will be difficult to meet the criteria there. And we did take, there was in the last recommendation a time, oh, I'm sorry, that's a different recommendation. So as I'm going along here, we did receive questions from Commissioner Larcell. And I thought that we could try to address them with the appropriate recommendations. So Commissioner Larcell asked about data that shows by having a 200 square foot size floating structure that it lessens fish impacts by having a smaller size overwater structure. I will ask, I think Caitlin Lovell is with us tonight from the Bureau of Environmental Services to respond to this. But first I could just add though that the larger the overwater floating structure is on the river, the more area there is for predatory fish to hide in the shade. And the more likelihood that salmon and steelhead fish species will be attacked, and especially the juveniles, and that will affect the survival rate of these threatened and endangered fish. So I will just stop with that. And Caitlin, are you on board here?
I am. Thank you, Debbie. And I'm not quite sure how much detail you want me to go into, but there are a number of studies, primarily out of Washington because of their shoreline management rules, about the use of shoreline habitat and overwater structures by these juvenile fish. And I mean, some of the studies are that the juvenile fish, especially the ESA listed salmon and steelhead that we're really interested in protecting, they are pushed into the main current as a result of these overwater structures. They do not like to go under the overwater structures. They do tend to hang out for the narrower structures. They tend to hang out on the edges. but they also did some studies tracking predatory fish, so smallmouth bass and prickly sculpin, and those fish tend to hang out under the overwater structures. So there's an issue of shade there. There's an issue of food web impacts as well, and then migratory behavior. There's a couple of other studies that kind of hint at the use of lights, both as a mitigating factor as well as a contributing impact. So the jury's kind of out on that. And then, did you want me to speak to the difference between the mitigation bank and the in lieu fee, or wait?
If you could wait a moment on that.
I just wanted to, I mean, the question was, is 200 feet big enough? And why did you pick that number? Was it a compromise number, or is that a good number that does protect fish, or is it just that we have to have some kind of size? I mean, I can know what your thought was. Why did you pick 200?
I can respond to that number. We picked 200 square feet. There's a federal disabilities access ways dock guidelines standard that is 200 square feet. We did try to look and see what other, the feds and the state had for standards, and they really don't have updated standards. So we look toward that as being the threshold based on the federal design guidelines.
Okay, so it's really more for wheelchair access.
As a size.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my whole thing was that I'd kind of picked this as something I was interested in, and I was having trouble figuring out how much of a problem it was. Like, how many docks are in that low, shallow water habitat that we're trying to protect? And
right. And I will talk about in the recommendations about replacement docks, the existing docks. Most of them are in shallow water habitat. This standard, again, is for new docks. Mm-hmm. And they likely will be in shallow water habitat area too. So they will have to not locate in that to happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
So a lot of the docks are in the shallow. So is this, are the regs going to have any impact on these already existing docks?
So I will get into that. That is you'll see with the second and third recommendations coming up. I will talk about that.
Thank you.
Should I go ahead and move on? And then, so the second recommendation is similar to what you saw on May 12th. It's updating the exemption for normal repair and maintenance, and also the replacement of existing docks. So replacement of existing, and this is the floating portion of a dock structure. If it's the entire piece replaced or the composites replaced, then it is not exempt anymore. Right now, all normal repair and replacement of these structures are exempt from river review and standards. And so what we're saying here is significant alterations or repairs being over 50% of the boat docking structure and its parts. If that is being repaired or replaced, we're going to say it's no longer exempt. And the one difference from the last iteration on this is that we don't have a time period associated with normal repair and maintenance for less than 50%, because it's something that's exempt and it's really difficult to track. So that's one piece of it. And then if we go to the next slide, Jeff, who's ever control. Thank you. So now we also, in the recommendations, if you look at the memo, there's a new river environmental overlay zone development standard for these significant repairs and alterations and the replacement of these existing docks that are no longer exempt from review. And so this standard basically says that you need to reduce the boating dock the floating portion, the structure, floating boat dock structure, by 25% if it's larger than the 200 square feet. And so that will see a reduction in the size of existing docks when they come in for these major repairs or replacement. And that also you can't move, if you're already located in shallow water habitat, we don't want you to move. You want you to stay where you are because we don't want further impacts in shallow water habitat. So that is a new standard. If you can't meet that standard, then you would trigger the river review. And so that's the third one, and that kind of addresses our approach to lessening the impacts of these existing docks.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing new questions on this. Should we keep going to?
Okay, so the last two items, recommendations, one on the approval criteria for river review, we are recommending a reorganization of that section. We did in the last recommendation we were going to add a fee in lieu program as part of the mitigation criteria, but we have found that there's an existing site, river restoration site, formerly known as the Linton Plywood site, that has available credits that could be used for mitigation. So there is no need for a fee in lieu program for South Reach. And we're also adding one criteria that allows for if a dock has been already permitted by the feds and state and has met mitigation requirements there, that mitigation can count toward the city's requirement, provided that it meets our mitigation requirements for natural resource protection. Caitlin will respond because I know Commissioner Larcelle, you did have questions about what is considered ample in mitigation credits that are available, as it was cited in the memo. And then what's the difference? How does mitigation credits work? And what's different about fee in lieu? So does that sort of, Caitlin can help answer your questions.
It doesn't have to be long-winded at all. I just wasn't sure I understood what the fee and why you were taking it off and what was the fee in lieu in the first place.
Okay, let me ask Mike, do you want to jump in for a second before we go to Caitlin?
Yeah, I think it should go without saying if the feds and the state, let's say they require a 1-to-1 mitigation, but the cities is 2-to-1. I totally appreciate and understand why you would allow credit to the mitigation that was required by the Fed and states. If the cities is more inclusive than the feds at the states, I assume that individual still needs to do the additional mitigation that would meet the city's requirement, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the stricter rule carries. Okay, and so I guess Caitlin, a brief answer to Katie.
Yes. So again, Caitlin Lovell with BES and Commissioner Larcelle. The real simple explanation between the difference of a mitigation bank and an in lieu fee is that the mitigation bank has already been built. So you're selling credits for something that's already been put into the ground. The offset exists. For an in lieu fee, you're basically writing a check to a promise of a future project. So there's a temporal lag between the time of impact and the time of offset. And that temporal lag bears a cost to it. So that gets calculated as part of how much they would have to pay. The preferences for the mitigation banks is because they've already been put in the ground, they're already providing those immediate ecosystem benefits that are being impacted by the proposed development. Does that help answer your question? Do you have follow-up?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So perhaps we can batch together the ones you just presented, B11.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide. And actually, it needs to be slightly amended here. This motion should read to amend Volume 1 of the proposed draft to be consistent with Memo B11, Part 2, Table B continued, And you had already voted on item B18. That is what it was meant to read, the new action. So I think you can just delete that.
No, we're not doing motions right now anyway. We're just doing straw polls. For
straw poll, I meant a straw poll.
Yeah, okay. Amendment to the straw poll item.
All right.
So let's have a hands raised vote for this. So far it's looking pretty good. Well, we've got 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus myself is 7. So we will recommend this forward to the draft language. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm looking at time check. If we're going to need 20 minutes, roughly, I'm making that up for the expiration date extension project. Could people go another 10, 15 minutes on this and then have 20 minutes for that? So a little over half an hour. Anyone, raise your hand if you need to excuse yourself in the next 40 minutes. Okay, then let's keep going. Thanks.
Okay, this is Jeff coming up, and we're going to shorten this section.
Yeah, hi, hi Jeff Cottle with Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So we did have an item here related to watershed health and resilience. So it was a continuation of a discussion that we had on enforcement. I think because of some very recent discussions that we had with BDS related to one of the recommendations, and we can at least go quickly to our recommendations so I can provide you with a little bit more detail. But so we are recommending, you had your memo A10 part 2, there were 3 recommendations in there related to enforcement. Given that we have a little bit more time with the new June 23rd session, I think we can move, and because of how far behind we are in terms of time, we can maybe move this discussion of enforcement to June 23rd. The specific item that we want to address a little bit further and continue to work with BDS is related to the removal standards. Excuse me, the first bullet on this slide, where we are proposing to require proof of compliance for 3 years for basic tree and vegetation removal standards, and also, excuse me, option 2 for correcting violations. Based on BDS feedback, I think one of the things we want to, since we have some time, is to investigate a little bit further is some of these removals that would trigger the standard might be relatively small. Maybe a removal of a nuisance tree, for example, because we're now regulating all trees in the setback, for example. So we want to look into options for maybe not requiring 3 years of proof for those smaller projects, smaller actions, development actions, but still getting to the aims of what the Commission and stakeholders had requested related to enforcement. So I think with that, unless there's some discussion about that, the other 2 items, recommendations 2 and 3, we would expect to continue to move forward with it as it currently stands. But I think we might have a little bit more kind of differentiation potentially for when the standards are triggered.
Okay. So would you like to push this whole thing to the next meeting, or just would you like to check in on a couple of these items right now?
Well, I thought we would go ahead and just discuss it all in terms of our short amount of time. We can just discuss it all and vote on it, or do a straw poll and then a final vote on the 23rd.
Okay.
Unless others disagree and would like to talk about it tonight. We can discuss them 2 and 3 if you'd like, but yeah, we were thinking just having this discussion.
Take this package to the next meeting. I think that sounds fine. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So then the only other item that we have is references to the miscellaneous. It's table E that was provided to you. It's basically a large list of miscellaneous zoning code and text amendments. At this point, we've only received a request for discussion on 2 items, and those were specifically addressing how we refer to and when we refer to certain portions of the Ross Island complex. So E49B and E49C. The others have not been, no other items have been requested for discussion. So are there any other items that are in Table E that commissioners would like to discuss?
I'm not seeing a hand raised. Thanks for checking. And for those 2 items, do you want to just do a quick summary and see if the staff has come to a agreement with whoever proposed that?
Yeah, so what we are recommending essentially is we had previously said that we did not want to, we didn't agree with the proposed updates that Commissioner Houck provided in these 2. After discussing it further with Commissioner Houck and thinking about it, we would like to go ahead and update the language based on his amendment, which specifically identifies 49B, specifically identifies, East and Toe Island, in addition to, what we generally address as Ross Island, which is technically Ross Island and Hardtack Island. They're joined at the southern end, but including that in as recognized areas of shallow water habitat. And then for 49C, also include those areas and the Ross Island Lagoon as potential areas for future restoration. And we think it's a good idea and think that it would be important to identify those areas.
Okay. And Mike, does that sound good to you? Those changes?
That sounds very good. I particularly appreciate the exclamation point. Credit.
Yeah, I thought, I just wanted to recognize you, Mike.
All right.
So yeah, the motion is essentially that that we have here is the revised amendments for 49B and C, and then for all the other proposed zoning code and text amendments in Table E.
Okay, please raise your hand if you support that miscellaneous code update with that recent change. It's almost like a race. Okay, I'm seeing plenty of support for this, and I will put my hand up as well and will recommend, if people can, to take a visit. I was out there a few days ago with my kids canoeing right through all these islands, and it's beautiful. So check it out if you haven't already.
Jeff, next slide. Yes, great. So next steps. As Eli mentioned earlier, we have scheduled June 23rd for a hearing and recommendation. At that meeting, we'll also talk about enforcement, the stuff that Jeff was just talking about, and then we'll get a briefing on houselessness in the South Reach. The step after that is a July 16th Design Commission hearing. You heard from Cassie Ballou at a previous meeting. She's drafted a transmittal letter for you to send to the Design Commission. So Chair Spivak, we will send you that draft that you can then edit and forward to the Design Commission, expressing the Commission's wishes. And then after that City Council hearing, we have a date for that. Yeah. So thank you so much, Commissioners, and sorry to keep you late tonight.
Well, thank you for stepping in. So this will, I'll close this discussion of the River Plan South Reach. We'll continue to 6:23, at which time we will reopen for public testimony. And although the impetus for that is related to uses of the river, people may tell us anything they want to tell us about this project. After that, we'll have our deliberations and vote on the project and send it forward to City Council. So thank you very much, staff. And we will do a little whiplash here back to the expiration date extension project. JP has indicated that he thinks we might be able to do this in 20 minutes. So let's find out. First, but these are some kind of complicated items. So we'll need to have a little briefing on a couple amendments that have been proposed. So I'm going to hand the baton back to Jeff and take us through this last bit.
To Jeff or to JP?
Oh, I'm sorry, to JP.
Okay, just making sure. I was like, I think I'm back on. All right, let me find where we left off with the amendment doc that Sandra was sharing. Let's see.
And I see Jeff Bacharach's hand up. So maybe while you're getting that up, I can get Jeff to jump in here for a moment. Jeff, do you want to share something, or maybe your hand's still up in favor of all straw poll items?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm having some internet problems, so if I'm cutting out, that's why. My internet keeps going off. I'm trying. So anyway, I will try to put my hand down.
Okay. I thought you were going to jump in. Oh, and actually, one moment, please. I'm gonna text while you're getting ready for Pat to know she can join in.
Okay, great. I was just going to ask you to bring her.
Thank you.
I already did.
Okay.
And Jeff, thanks for all your support on the South Reach items.
I did hear that, Mike, and you're welcome. Thank you for your committed leadership.
All right. I think.
You know when you want me to start when Kat's back.
Yeah. I guess we'll give her a minute. Stretch break.
Okay.
Okay, I think we do have quorum without Kat. A couple of us have texted her, so I think you can start off. She's more familiar with this stuff than probably most of the rest of us are.
Okay.
She can ask questions if she wants. Thanks.
Okay, so this next amendment is an amendment to non-conforming upgrades option 2. I'll try to explain to you what that is in simple terms. Non-conforming upgrades, they're focused on upgrading non-conforming development on sites. And generally, they're things that affect the appearance and the impacts on a site. So typically things that need to be brought into conformance. So, well, let me back up. So that's what a non-conforming upgrade. It's non-conforming development on the site. And the zoning code requires applicants to bring those non-conforming elements into compliance if they have alterations on a site that trigger it. And so the trigger is a $300,000 valuation. So if you come in with a project that's valued at more than $300,000, then you trigger non-conforming upgrades. There are some exceptions to things that don't trigger it, like seismic work or something like that. And so if you're on the hook for the non-conforming upgrades, you have to upgrade your site. Typically, the things that we're talking about, like I said, it's exterior stuff. So landscaping and trees, pedestrian circulation systems, bike parking is a big one. Bicycle parking, screening, required paving for surface parking. So just to give an example, imagine that it's a single one that I've seen a lot, a residential structure that's in a commercial zone. It's been used as residential, and now they're coming in to alter it. And they're going to use it for commercial, and it's over 300,000, and it triggers non-conforming upgrades. So the type of things that they would have to be triggering would be putting in landscape for parking areas and making sure the parking is paved and whatnot. So those are the upgrades. When an applicant is doing those upgrades, they have 2 options of how they can meet those upgrades. So the first one, option 1, it's kind of, you can see it here in the code on my shared screen here. Option 1 says that the applicant is required to make up to 10% of the value of the proposed project of those non-conforming upgrades. So if your project is $301,000, then you have to make $30,000 of upgrades to meet the non-conforming upgrades requirements. The second option is that if an applicant feels they can't do that during that time period, right, with that building permit, and they want to push it out into the future a certain amount of time, they can come in under option 2, which gives you the option of doing all of the upgrades. You have to do 100% of whatever the upgrades are to bring the site into conformance, but you have a set period of time to do it. And so this table here lays out what the compliance periods are. So for a larger project, a larger square footage, you'd have 5 years. For smaller ones, you have 2 years. So what this amendment is proposing to amend, and actually let me get a little bit more about the process of it. So for an applicant that wants to do that option 2, they come in, they apply, they have to record a covenant that states the time period, the improvements that they're going to be making, and a time period over which they will be making those improvements, and they have to record that covenant. And then they have that compliance period. And so during that compliance period, they have to do the work. And at the end of the compliance period, they have to call in for an inspection and basically get it certified. And so at the end of the 4 years, they have to call in an inspection, and they come out, an inspector comes out and sees that you've done all of your upgrades and the parking is paved, and you're off the hook. If you don't do that, then BDS keeps a list of these, and they put an alert on your property, and you can't come in and get another building permit until you've taken care of the non-conforming upgrades. So what this proposal is would amend the code to allow for more time for applicants that are doing that second option where you do it over a period of time. And so the amendment that's being proposed would be to add language at the end that says, for covenants that were in effect, so that's the other tricky part here, is that we have to amend the covenant. The covenant is the document that's been recorded that says this is what you must do. So for covenants that were in effect on March 8th of 2020, which is when COVID, the governor declared a health emergency, the compliance period expires on the later of January 1st of 2024, or the period in the recorded covenant. So if they have a recorded covenant that goes beyond 2024, then they're fine. That's when it would expire. If it was going to be expiring before 2024, January 1 of 2024, then this extension would cover them and bring them to 2024.
Okay, thank you. Does staff have a recommendation on this? I have a summary from Sandra, but I'll let you share.
Our recommendation on this initially, our thinking was that it's not entirely necessary. And also, if an applicant is coming in, needs this extension, generally that's triggered by them coming in by a building permit. So if our thinking as staff was that if an applicant's coming in for a building permit, they should be able to do the upgrades at the same time before they do that. If they're going through the process of getting a building permit, what's stopping them from meeting their non-conforming upgrades? So it didn't seem like an entirely necessary amendment. I did hear a counter argument that in some cases, because of the compliance issue, it may not. So I did hear an example of somebody that had a permit and they were having trouble because now they need to get an adjustment to their property to meet the non-conforming upgrades. They're on a constrained site and they have neighbors that are watching them and are concerned about the upgrades and are monitoring this. And so if they go past their deadline, which in this case would be, I think, in June, then the neighbors can start calling in and there could be compliance issues. What the impacts of those compliance issues, how heavy that is, there's no fines involved. The thing that the mechanism is that you can't come in and get a building permit.
Right. Okay. But someone committed to make these improvements, they just haven't gotten around to doing it yet.
Right.
And they have a timeline for that. Okay. So thanks for the summary. Would someone like to, we haven't actually made a motion on this, would someone like to make a motion? That's open question.
Am I on?
Yeah, you're on, Jeff.
Okay, sorry, I'm just having a lot of computer problems here. I'm a little on the fence on this. I appreciate JP's pointing out that this may not be necessary, that the natural building permit process may take care of it. On the other hand, I'm sensitive to any development that's kind of going to get caught up in this sort of COVID timeframe. And since we are extending all manner of approvals, I would certainly support this, and I would make a motion to do that. I'm not sure what the appetite is, so I'll go ahead and make the motion and see if anyone else cares to second it or feels like there's some reason to just, as part of our extending all manner of pending permits, to do it for this one as well. So I'll move adoption of the language that's been proposed.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, was that Ben?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Then discussion? I'm going to generally weigh in with lack of support for this one, just feeling that it's one thing to extend entitlements for new development be proposed. It's another to give people more time for doing something that they said that they were going to do anyway. So I'm less likely to be lenient in extension in that case. And it seems like the enforcement is kind of minimal. The city has anyway. It really is just if they want to do a building permit, then they have to do the work done, which they had already agreed to do. Any other comments?
You know, I'll go ahead and withdraw my motion. It doesn't seem like this has caught the eye of other commissioners. So
I see a hand from Kat. You might be wrong.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kat. Go ahead. Maybe I was premature.
Excuse me. So my first reaction was I think it does seem perhaps unnecessary, but I actually agree with your point, Jeff. I like consistency in the things that we're doing, and this just seems consistent. And I started thinking about while construction hasn't been halted, construction isn't easy right now, and construction is difficult right now. And so you could have somebody in a position of really trying to do the right thing, and they are working on their non-conforming list, except that they're having a very hard time getting a contractor to show up, or the contractor is raised the cost of doing the work due to all of the implementation measures to keep people safe during COVID, and now it's costing a lot more. And while I don't know that there's going to be a lot of that, there'd be some of it, and just in the spirit of, again, we're trying to help people out through this, I would be supportive of it.
I will chime in as a general contractor. I have not had as easy a time of finding subcontractors in the past several years as I am right now. Work seems to be slowing up. We're getting 2 or 3 crews instead of 1. So that may be a different experience in central city locations, but my sense is that it's actually becoming, it's not yet cheaper, but availability is a lot higher than it has been. Steph.
Thank you. I guess my question here is the same one. You know, I think that generally the criteria of, is this more kind of housekeeping? I hear Kat say, like, you know, in the interest of looking at permits, you know, across the board, and that this is contiguous with that, or and by housekeeping, one implies inherently non-controversial or potentially substantive with consequences that might impede the easy passage of something that is supposed to be responsive.
Well, as the maker of the motion, I would only say step one. I don't see this house. I mean, I see this as it's definitely COVID related. So I'm not sure if that was when you said housekeeping. I didn't know if you meant non-COVID related. So I would also say I don't know if it's controversial. It's more. I mean, Kat persuaded me back to where I started. It's probably a small change. It's probably very few projects affected by it, but. So I don't think it's housekeeping. I think it's COVID related. It's a small COVID related matter, but I'll keep my motion on the table because I agree with Kat's point. It's sort of consistent with what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Chris.
So my question is, does this really need 4 years of relief, or would a couple of years be sufficient? It seems like it's going to cure itself pretty quickly.
I heard that barely, but I think Chris was asking whether 4 years is needed as an extension, or a shorter relief period would suffice.
I think
a friendly amendment if you want to propose something less than 4 years.
Sure, I propose a friendly amendment for January 1st, 2022.
I would accept that friendly amendment.
So yeah, do you accept that, Jeff?
Sure.
2022. And Ben, do you accept that as a second?
Yes.
Okay. All right, it's been amended, friendly amendment to extend these until January 1st, 2022. Other comments or discussion? All right, Julie, if you're still there, can you call a vote?
I'm still here. Backrack.
Yes.
Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Hauk.
Yes.
Larcel.
Yes.
I think Oriana has left. Yeah. Ralph.
Yes. And I will say Oriana, I believe, had to leave because of an emergency vet appointment.
Yes, she did. Thank you. Schultz.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes, that passes unanimously. Thank you for the amendment, Chris. Let's go to the next item.
Okay. So the final amendment is an amendment to the Northwest Master Plan. So the Northwest Master Plan basically encompasses, if you're familiar with the Conway site in Northwest Portland, and it's written into the code that there's a process for creating Northwest Master Plans within the Northwest Plan District. And so a Northwest Master Plan was created as a quasi-judicial procedure back in 2012. And so I think the effective date was 2012. And so this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier today about the 10 years versus 3 years expiration date. So this has its own expiration date and it's written into the adopted master plan, which in this case is 10 years. So I don't have in front of me the exact date of when that one is going to be expired, but basically we received a request from the developers of the Conway Master Plan, this Northwest Master Plan. It's the only Northwest Master Plan that we have, and to extend that because of COVID issues of getting that site further developed. So this amendment would be to add the language in yellow that, and this is the way we had to capture it, with the exception of Northwest. So it would expire after 10 years with the exception of Northwest Master Plans approved prior to the effective date of this ordinance, which remain in effect until January 1 of 2024. So that would give them, I believe it's going to be expiring in 2022. And so it gives them a couple extra years to get that worked out.
I have a question. Would inclusionary housing apply to this project?
There is no inclusionary housing as part of the project because they were approved under the old code.
And if they didn't get this extension, would it start be applying to future phases?
If they had to come in for future design reviews, then they would start being covered under the new code. So yes.
Okay, and how many units are at play?
I don't know the number of units that are at play. Shannon, do you have any, are you able to weigh in?
I don't know anything about the number of units. I do know that some of it is commercial development that is left to be built.
I'm seeing a hand from Chris. Do you want to jump in, Chris?
Sure. So I have some history with this, although I don't have a financial interest, so it's not a conflict of interest. But back when I was a civilian, before I was on this commission, I worked on the Northwest District Plan. Debbie Bischoff, who I think has left the meeting, was also very involved in that for the Bureau. This plan has shaped development of a large part of Northwest and resulted in a lot of new housing in the city. There are some important public benefits still to be realized, including the development of a public plaza. I would hate to see those benefits derailed because of COVID. So I'm good with going ahead and moving this amendment.
Okay. Kat? Oh, I guess I'll take that as moving the amendment. First, maybe I'll see if there's a second since we're in discussion already. Is there a second?
Seconds.
No, second.
I heard a second from a male voice first and then.
Hauk.
Hauk. Thank you, Hauk. Okay, so we are into discussion. Kat.
I'm literally scratching my head on this one. So definitely have a potential conflict of interest. We've done many projects. We were a part of getting this master plan approved. And who knows if we'd be involved in the future projects that move forward or still have or remain to be built here. My gut tells me just to keep my nose very clean. I should probably step away here in a second, but I just have a question, which I have no idea. Like, Chris was saying and or has been stated, the master plan becoming no longer effective, there's a bunch of parts and pieces in it besides just inclusionary that kind of then remain. Like, I don't know what the zoning reverts back to. So I would hope that staff could explain the complexity of the expiration of this, because this is an area that has a required master plan on it. I guess I'm wondering if you don't have to then have a brand new master plan come through to resolve the properties that have not been developed.
And maybe I'll piggyback on that. Okay, go ahead.
And I'm thinking, like I said, I probably need to just jump off and out of the conversation to keep it clean from there and just leave that question out there and let you guys debate it.
Right, thanks.
Much as I'm curious as can be.
Tack on a question. If this code update weren't happening and the master plan was getting to the end of its 10-year period, what would there be some other recourse the plan could do to get an extension? Well, maybe that's a similar question to the one Kat asked. So I'll go to staff and then to Jeff after that.
My understanding is that, so the master plan itself, there is a process for amending the master plan. So they can go through a quasi-judicial review to amend the master plan. That could open them up to then being subject to the new code. Is that correct, Shannon?
There is a process for amending it. It doesn't say I'm looking at it right now. I think they would, the approval criteria are the same as the approval criteria for the master plan. The first one, it is a type 3. I think they would still be vested in that old code, but I'm not 100% positive. I do know that Kim Talent suggested that they were coming in for an amendment or an update to their master plan because they might have exhausted their FAR. She wasn't positive about that either.
Okay. I'll go to Jeff and then I've got my own thought for a minute. Jeff?
Just a couple of quick thoughts, picking up on both what Chris and Kat said. Remember, this isn't one project in the sense of they approved a certain number of housing units. Eli, when you asked how many housing units, I think when each block for development comes in, you will learn how many housing units. So we don't have a set number of units we're working with on your IZ issue. But the other thing is, someone who lives in the area, each piece depends on the other piece. Chris mentioned the park. So now that park goes away and you're going to start over, but you've got properties that I don't know if they contributed to the development of the park or they certainly were built in reliance on the park. So I guess my point is, it's just there's so many moving parts. Remember, I don't know what the number is. Someone submitted a map, 16, 18 blocks. Chris, I don't even know the exact number, but it's an awfully large project to start trying to recreate, and even more difficult to recreate it in the midst of COVID, where everything is so uncertain. So I just think I think approving the extension for Conway is absolutely consistent with all the other extensions we're granting, and even more so because it's bigger and more complex than probably any existing project at the moment in the city. So I guess I'm just emphasizing the same points the other two people said.
Okay, I see Joe's hand up. Welcome, Joe.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hi. Jeff is absolutely right. It's it's complex. I don't think some of the things that we're worried about are exactly how it would play out. But as of right now, this is I need to go back and research this piece of code to be able to tell you exactly how this might play out after it expires. A question for the applicant is, if it weren't for COVID, if it weren't for this opportunity to get an extension, what was the plan to try to bring this project to close? This project had the ability to shift FAR across around parcels, like even where it stands in terms of the distribution of uses across all those different parcels is not clear without research. So I guess the straight answer is I can't give you a straight answer about what happens if it expires without doing some research. Jeff's last argument actually resonated with me just because there's something here to figure out, and I have not heard of the next plan for this as it draws close to expiring with or without, this extension. So it may need more time to figure out. There could be but it was designed to expire, I believe, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, so that if it wasn't making progress, this was the first master plan we ever did, we could take a step back and say, okay, what's up with it now? And what do we have to do to sort of evaluate the future of this place and what public benefit means and the like. And so, for instance, if we were to do that now, inclusionary housing is our new norm. You know what I mean? So that's when that kind of thing rolls in. So this, in a way, is a good example of why you expire these permits. So can't give you a straight answer, need to do some research. Giving it an extension gives everyone more time to think that through. Can't represent without the research, though, if there's a problem that's created by doing that.
I see Chris's hands up. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to tag on that I'm supporting this with the assumption that the assertion about this being supported by the neighbor association is correct. We don't have that in the record. We only have, the testifier reporting that secondhand. I wonder if there's a way to include this in the package, but provide a way for that research to happen on the way to City Council. So we might have a more definitive recommendation when it gets to Council. Is there a process that would let us do that?
I will personally say that I'm really interested in what the process is otherwise, because in terms of making a decision on how an extension happens, having that go through a land use review process where people can discuss how things evolved over time seems that it might inform a better extension or more thoughtful extension than us spending 15 minutes on it at a PSC meeting. That's my bias as far as letting that process happen. So I'm hopeful that the process is available, but I don't know the answer to that, as none of us do quite yet. Yeah.
Chris, was your suggestion on the neighborhood association approval that we somehow try to condition it on that being a real fact?
No, I was just clarifying that my support is conditioned on that, and I wouldn't be proposing this if I hadn't heard that. And we don't have evidence of the record that assertion is true. I mean, I don't have any reason to disbelieve the testifier. I just wanted to clarify that we were acting on an uncertain fact.
So you weren't asking for clarification on this whole issue of what would the master plan amendment process look like? That was not your issue.
Well, I think what I was suggesting is there's a way to sort of include this in the package that goes to Council, but task staff with further researching the consequences of an expiration, so that if by the time we got to Council, we figured out that extending this has some negative impacts, that there's a chance to reassess that at Council.
Eli, if I could jump in.
Yes, please.
I think that Chris has got a good suggestion. That you can keep moving forward. You're doing it on the basis of the best information we can give you. This requires more research, but it is such a big deal that if it expires and the next round of that process is not clear, it could have implications. We would step up and do some research to see if indeed this is something we should bring back at the City Council level. My suspicion is at City Council, it's going to be too complicated for them to do prospectively, or sort of, there's the process issues of community input, and that's what this whole plan's about. There's the absolute expectations that it's going to include inclusionary housing now. You can just put your money on it. All of these things get really complex really quickly and are going to be even hard for the owners to figure out in this time frame and in the period of COVID. But we're willing to continue to do some research and let it play out at city council if it must. But I don't think you have enough information today for us to make a clear decision one way or the other.
Okay, Jeff?
One very, very important practical concept. One of the key reasons this was a successful master plan and has been is you had a single developer controlling all the land. And so it was far more easy for the neighbors, the city, and one developer to negotiate a package that seemed like a good proposal for everybody. What happens now when you've got, I don't know how many different owners? You're going to expect them to come together on a single master plan that affects everybody's competing interests, competing property ownership. I can tell you one thing for sure, Joe. This is going to be one hell of a difficult, complicated planning land use process.
Yeah.
Amend this. You got agreements on, like you said, what happened to FAR that's been transferred? What happens to the housing that's been built? Does it count towards your inclusionary housing? What happens? There's a commitment to build a park that my understanding is goes away. So now I just think you're playing with fire to, it's going to be very complicated and you're going to jeopardize a lot of the benefits and the time and energy that went into this plan. So I don't know what we're going to learn between now and going to city council. I think we should just grant it as part of all the extensions we're doing. But so anyway.
Thanks. Any other discussion? I think we do have a motion and a second, so I will take us to a vote on this. And I think that either way, we're going to be writing something in our letter to City Council to do some homework between now and July 8th. So Julie, can you please do a vote?
Okay, Backrack?
I vote yes, and I would also support Chris's idea that somehow it's a yes contingent on verifying the support of the neighborhood association.
Great. Bortolazzo?
Yes, and ditto on the support of the neighborhood association. But I think we're acting in good faith. I trust that they wouldn't have said that. So yes.
Great. Hauk?
Yes.
Larcel?
Yes.
Rouse?
Yes, and agree with Ben, Jeff.
Schultz?
Schultz is not voting, I believe.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Smith?
Chris?
Yes.
Spivak?
Thanks for the good discussion. Yes, that passes. With the ditto comments that I said before. I think that's the end of the amendments. Am I wrong on that?
That's it. That's the end.
All right, then I would accept a motion to vote on this package to send to City Council.
I move.
Jeff moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Jeff. Any discussion on the package? All right, Julie, please take a vote on that.
Okay, Backrack?
Yes. Good job, staff.
Bortolazzo?
Enthusiastically, yes.
Hauk?
Yes.
Larcel?
Yes.
Routh?
Yes, and thank you to staff for your patience.
Schultz?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Spivak?
Yes, resounding unanimous vote. I hope that staff can get this July 8th date to work still. And thank you everyone for work on this project.
So do we.
So this, get this right, the River Plan South Reach discussion is continued to June 23rd, and the expiration date extension project is done. Thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Thanks for staying later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.